You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai.
Yeah, and today we are talking about the cards in the 99 from Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth.
Yeah, very excited to talk about these cards. Was finishing up the research last night, and there's a lot of cool stuff. There's
some really, really cool cards in this set. Like, there's obviously a couple of really broken cards.
Yeah, there are some broken things, too. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about, although that's fun, too. Yeah.
There are some, like, very flavorful, fun, like, Lord of the Rings feeling cards. I've been playing Limited with this set all weekend, and it feels cool, and everybody has a different tone playing it, so I'm really digging it.
Yeah, we did our internal Command Zone pre-release, and I just get giddy every time. I'm like, I play Gimli, it's Gimli. I play Legolas next.
We should talk during the pre-release. We had Lord of the Rings on in the background, and Jordan Pridgen had Lash of the Balrog as the Balrog was doing the whip in the movie.
Yeah, he goes,
and he was wait. I cast
it. That was awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, if you're as excited about the Lord of the Rings set as we clearly are, and you want to get your hands on these cards, whether it's sealed product or singles, just go to cardkingdom.com/command. That's the best place to go to order your Magic product, singles, anything at all. You can order a collector's booster box if you want to go after that, the 1/1 ring, which I think hasn't been found yet. It's a little unclear because some people are putting fakes out there, but I'm pretty sure at this point of recording, no one's gotten it yet. Otherwise, of course, just you can be a normal person like the rest of us and just, get the singles you want out of, for your decks. Again, Card Kingdom has a huge inventory. They're going to have all the cards you want, whether you're getting the Lord of the Rings singles or older singles to go in the Aragorn deck you're building or whatever. cardkingdom.com/command. And the best thing about it is you get it all in one package. We talk about this every time, but that convenience factor is very, very high, especially if you're going to like a Command Fest, which you were just at. We've got Barcelona coming up, Vegas right after that. If you want to get cards in time all at once so you know you're going to have your deck for an event like that, I can't recommend any place except Card Kingdom to get your cards for sure.
Yep, and they all come in one package, and once they show up on your doorstep, you're going to want to put them in some sleeves, and you can go to ultrapro.com/command to get the highest quality sleeves in the market. Plus, they have all of the officially licensed Middle-earth / Magic the Gathering, Lord of the Rings art. And there are tons of art pieces in this set. It's one of the biggest art sets, honestly, ever.
Yeah, for sure. Because everything has to have new art, including all the Commander product stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that they made is unbelievable. There's tons of beautiful playmats and sleeves and deck boxes and binders available with new Lord of the Rings art right at Ultra Pro. If you want to keep an eye on sales, or if you want to keep an eye on drops, which sometimes they'll release Secret Lair art products, you can sign up for their newsletter, and that'll give you all of the Ultra Pro information you need when they go live, so they don't sell out before you get them in your hands. Again, you can support the show and support your cards by going to ultrapro.com/command.
Support the show and your cards. I like
and
that.
And protect them.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, the final way to support all of our content is directly if you go to patreon.com/commandzone. All kinds of cool perks there. We're on our Discord all the time chatting with our patrons. You can play spell table games with us. You get access to some of our content earlier, like extra turns and game nights than the general public. We also have exclusive content, Turn Talk, which is our fun sort of after the extra turns episodes. We get the players together and kind of talk about the game from their perspective, like what mistakes maybe they made or other lines they had, that kind of stuff. So
one more draw.
Yeah, or I had this card in hand and I should have played it. So patreon.com/commandzone is where to go to join our community. All right. Plus we shout out one lucky patron every single episode. Don't forget that, Josh. And this episode is dedicated to Brian Hook. Brian.
You rock.
You definitely rock. All right, let's get into it here. The main topic, cards that matter in the 99 from Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. There's how many are there? 20?
We're going to talk about 20 today. Of course, there are more than 20 available in the set, but we're going to talk about the 20 that are going to be the trickiest to evaluate. There are some cards that are great and we're not going to talk about today that if they're good in your deck, you'll know it for the most part. There are also a couple of cards like Delighted Halfling, which I love, but is like a very powerful mana dork. put it in your decks.
Yeah,
you don't need us to tell us.
This is an efficient removal spell.
Yeah.
That's not that interesting to talk about.
Yeah, so we got 20 cards that we're excited to talk about in Lord of the Rings, and we are going to break them down for you and hopefully find some new homes for them in your decks. Starting with this first card, which is from the Commander product.
Yeah, we got to reveal this card
in
the full deck reveal.
And we revealed it slightly wrong.
Yeah, we'll reveal it better this time. All right, it's Call for Aid, 4 and a red for a sorcery. Gain control of all creatures target opponent controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain haste until end of turn. You can't attack that player this turn. You can't sacrifice those creatures this turn. So we've got some comparisons here. And I think you're going to see this throughout the episode and the thing we do, especially for in the 99 episodes. I think, though, it's a sort of it's a standard of card evaluation in general, which is to look for comparison cards that have existed that are similar to it to kind of give you a gauge on like where this sits and how good it's going to be.
Right.
So the big ones are Mob Rule, a favorite of mine.
I love Mob Rule.
And Insurrection, an old favorite of mine, a little too expensive these days. And they both steal all the creatures. Mob Rule says big creatures are little creatures with no sort of clarification on what you can do with them. This is an interesting sort of like, oh, we're kind of fixing this a little bit. We're making it. You're asking for help from an opponent, and you can't betray them. Yeah, you don't betray them. They're helping you.
They're out of the goodness of their heart, and you're making.
It's really a voluntold situation.
Yeah,
but yeah.
It's interesting. It's 1 mana cheaper than Mob Rule, which is like
significant.
Like 60-70% of the board typically when you cast Mob Rule, and it is significantly cheaper than Insurrection, which is 8 mana. It's 4 mana less than that.
Now it only gets one opponent's stuff. It doesn't
one
get
opponent. Yeah,
it doesn't steal from all 3 players' board.
And you can't do the threaten thing where you steal them and sack all their stuff and be like, ha ha.
Which is one of the main reasons I think you play. I play Mob Rule. I don't play Insurrection so much, but I play a lot of Mob Rule. And I think maybe I have one deck with it where there's not a lot of sack outlets. The rest, it's kind of a requirement for running it.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see if Call for Aid, that you can't sacrifice clause is big enough to make it so we don't really play it.
So I can see a few scenarios with this deck, and I want to run through them. I could see that you steal all of the stuff from the player with the best board.
Yeah.
And then you make a reckless attack at the other two, where you're just like, block as you must.
Please kill some of this.
Kill as much as you can.
And also some of it will maybe get through and hurt you. That's good for me too.
Yeah, it's just a big attack, and you try and mess up their board sort of as much as you can. Plus, all their creatures are tapped now.
Yeah, you shields down them, depending on where they're seated.
Right.
If the most powerful player is the player to your left, that won't work.
Not as good.
Yeah.
I could also see stealing from the player with the second best board and using your board and the second best board to take down the player who's most ahead.
Right.
So ganging up on them as much as you can in one big attack.
Yep.
And I could also see a third situation where it's down to you and one other player, and you steal their board and hope they have something worth stealing.
Something that's going to have some utility.
Just like a Nyx Bloom Ancient or like a Consecrated Sphinx or just anything that you're like, hopefully I can get some utility out of this in the turn that I steal it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is the thing we got wrong when we revealed this card.
Yeah.
And I think I said it, which was that it says you can't attack that player this turn. Mm-hmm. Not with those creatures.
Nope, no attack.
You can't attack them. So this card gets... Unlike Mob Rule and Insurrection, which still are useful when you get down to 1v1, this gets way worse when you get down to 1v1 because you can't even steal their board just to get their blockers out of the way to attack with the rest of the stuff. Mm-hmm. So in 1v1 situation, it's quite bad. And maybe there's some hope they've got something utility. They've got an Exclamation or something. But if they had an Exclamation, they probably beat you already.
Right.
Unless they just cast it.
Right. If they did the old Nyx Bloom and pass.
Yeah, which...
Don't do.
People don't really do that anymore. They've learned not to do that. Yeah, so I think that's another sort of knock against this card, which is in a 1v1 situation is almost entirely useless.
Yeah, so I was looking at this and I was like, okay, so it's not going to operate in the same way that Mob Rule and Insurrection is going to. It's not going to be steal and sack. It's not going to be steal and attack. You have to use it with cards that care about how many creatures you have, kind of.
Interesting.
Or you have to get around the clauses in it with sort of sneaky ways.
Yeah, that's where my brain went. It says specifically you can't sacrifice the creatures.
Yeah. You can still get rid of them.
You can still do things to the creatures. Just sacrificing is off the table, which is the easiest way to affect them. But it's not the only way.
So I played against a very sweet Minsk Beloved Ranger deck. This is not Planeswalker Minsk. This is red, green, white for a human ranger 3/3. And when it enters, it makes a boo, but it has an activated ability that says X : until end of turn, target creature you control has base power and toughness XX and becomes a giant. In addition to its other types, activate only as a sorcery.
When I saw this on the sheet, I literally put a note of like, how does Minsk synergize? I don't get it.
X can be 0.
Yeah.
So you can pay, your creature gets 0 toughness, 0 power and toughness, 0 power and toughness, and you remove their creature without technically sacrificing them.
Yeah. It's your creature.
It's your creature.
Which is why you can do it. Yeah. But you can make it a 0/0.
Yes.
So if you have Minsk on board and you cast Call for Aid, attack somebody, then after combat, you can be like, cool, give this, and all 0 toughness.
Yep.
That's cool. That's great. That's sort of a way around it. Transmogrify and sort of polymorph cards in general tend to work as well because they exile something off your board, and then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal the next creature, and that sort of comes into play. So you can, with Transmogrify, you do one target creature, and Transmogrify you can target your opponent's stuff, but in this case you would do your own. I think Synthetic Destiny and Mass Polymorph, which are basically the same card, they exile all creatures you control, and then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal that many creatures, however many you exiled, and those all come into play. So that seems very powerful. Those are 6 CMC cards, so you're going to need 11 mana to do this, but that's a pretty powerful play. Take somebody's board, attack somebody else with it, polymorph all that stuff into creatures off your deck. So you end up with the same amount of creatures. If you take 5 from them and you had 3, you're gonna have 8 creatures.
And they're all your creatures now.
Yeah.
You just used the bodies that you just stole from them to make it into something else that is more usable for you.
And you didn't sack them.
I didn't.
What? I turned them into other things.
You said no sacrificing.
Yeah, I signed that contract. Loopholes, my favorite.
This next section you brought up, which I did not think of at all, and I love it.
Yeah, so interestingly, or not interestingly, but also not sacking is exchanging control of things once you've got their things. So Zedru, you can be like, cool, I took your thing, I attacked with it, now I'm going to give it to somebody else, just so you don't have it.
And once you don't have it anymore, that clause is gone.
Right,
they get to keep it all permanently. Yeah,
because the Zedru said, well, that person gets control of it. So that control, I guess, overwrites the give it back control.
Yeah, I mean, you're the only one that has the until at the end of turn clause.
Oh, so it's not on an opponent, so they don't have to, they never check. They don't go, whose is this later? Yeah, okay. There's also cultural exchange, which just choose any number of creatures target player controls, which can be you. Choose the same number of target creatures another target player controls. Those players exchange control of those creatures. So you can even keep the stuff that was yours and only exchange control of theirs.
Yeah.
So you can be like, cool, steal all of Jimmy's stuff, attack Lady with it, and then I'm going to exchange control of all Lady's creatures for all the stuff I stole from Jimmy. And now I just get to keep Lady's creatures, and she gets to keep Jimmy's creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jimmy cries.
Yeah, the real loser in this situation is Jimmy. You have to have somebody that has enough. You have to have 2 players with enough creatures. And maybe you're in a situation where you're like, I stole 5. I can only exchange 3. They're going to get 2 back, but it'll be the worst 2. That's fine.
This is a real chaotic deck, and I am here for it. I always thought it would be fun to do a Zedru Threaten deck where you just redistribute the wealth.
Yeah. Take this, hit you with it, give it to you.
Yeah. I was going to build it in a time where Bernie Sanders was a relevant person, and I wanted a Bernie Sanders Zedru deck where you
I give you. Yeah.
And then you don't get to keep that. You can have it, though.
Another thing that's not sacrificing is bouncing to hand. Mm-hmm. So Paradoxical Outcome was a card that came to mind because it says return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands. So we'll go back to your opponent's hands. Now, the interesting part, it says draw a card for each card returned to your hand this way. So you won't draw the cards for the permanents you'd return to your opponent's hands. You're still free to return some amount of your own permanents if you want to draw cards there, but also just like steal your stuff, hit somebody with it, bounce it all back to your hand. That's a way to take the archenemy player and put them in last place.
Right. It's sort of like a DIY River's Rebuke where you get to steal it first.
Yeah, you first get to hit somebody with it, which could be good.
Cool.
It could be like steal this, kill this player,
yeah,
and then bounce to your hand, and if it's down to 1v1 now, you're in huge trouble.
Right.
Redeploy your whole board, and I've still got mine. And Paradoxical Outcome is a card that sees play, so that's another thing I'm always looking for in these situations, because we're going to talk about a card in a minute, which I think is the best card with this card.
It's so funny.
But it's not a card that very many people actually play, so... Because you're not going to build your deck around Call for Aid. What you're looking for is, does my deck already have Paradoxical Outcome?
Right.
Does my deck already have Cultural Exchange? Does my deck already have Mass Polymorph? If it does, then this is now a candidate to go in your deck. But you don't go, I'm going to put Call for Aid in my deck, and then I'm going to put Cultural Exchange and Mass Polymorph and Synthetic Destiny into this deck. Because what if you don't draw Call for Aid?
And then you just have all these Polymorph spells.
Yeah.
Something that's interesting about this spell is we think of Insurrection and Mob Rule as like final turn plays, and Call for Aid is a middle game play.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way.
I think you don't count on winning with this card. Like, if you have a moment where it's kind of good, you just slam it and do your best. Like, because you do not want this to be in your hand when there's only 2 players left, and you don't want to do it. It won't get you out of a sticky situation necessarily unless somebody is way ahead. But it's
you're looking for sort of maximum disruption rather than game winning. Yeah.
I think this is a disruption spell rather than a win the game spell for sure. Yeah.
So another thing that's not sacrificing is flickering things. And you can specifically look for flickers that return things to the battlefield under your control.
There isn't many of them, but there are a few.
So Ghostly Flicker is the one that sees the most play. Very, very common card to see. So if you had this in your deck, it says exile 2 artifact creatures and or lands you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under your control, not under owner's control. So 2 of the things you stole with Call for Aid, you could sort of blink out when they come back. They're yours now. And then the coolest one, but it's Magical Chrysalis Land, but still cool, is Day of the Dragons.
I loved this one.
So this one's good on all access except for the mana value.
4 blue for an
7.
enchantment. When Day of the Dragons enters the battlefield, exile all creatures you control. Then create that many 5/5 red dragon creature tokens with flying. Crazy. Then, when Day of Dragons leaves the battlefield, sacrifice all dragons you control, then return the exiled cards to the battlefield under your control.
So it's doing a lot of stuff. It's a lot of mana. You need 12 mana to do this, but grab all of Jimmy's stuff, attack Lady with it, play Day of the Dragons. His 5 creatures and my 3 creatures become 5/5 dragons. I've got 8 5/5 dragons. If somebody doesn't deal with that pretty quickly, they're going to die. And then if I can get rid of Day of Dragons, or they have to, when this stuff all comes back in, it's your control. So I will keep the creatures I stole from Jimmy, and I'll still have them at that point, unless I've killed him or something.
Yeah, this exile the creatures that you control thing is also just something you can do. Like, Glorious Protector is a great way to do that. It's when it enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. So you can sort of hide the creatures that you've stolen under a single creature, and it will come back under their controller's control, but...
only if they kill that thing.
They have to get rid of the Glorious Protector first.
Yeah, so now instead of like, hey, I just give these back to you, it's like, I will if...
Yeah, but you got to get rid of my Lumbering Battlement.
Yeah.
Which does roughly the same thing.
Yeah, so again, if you had those cards already in a deck, maybe this Call for Aid becomes a little bit better for you, as like, it's a possible combo when I've got 9 mana or whatever, that now I can steal your stuff, hit somebody else with it, and really kind of get rid of it until you've got a removal spell.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot better than just playing it and being like, here you go. I hope I did enough damage. Because otherwise it's kind of a lava axe.
Yeah.
We had an interesting, because you and I had a discussion. You brought up phasing. And I was like, oh, crap. How does phasing work with this? So if I cast Call for Aid and took all of Jimmy's stuff and then somehow phased it out, and there's a number of new cards. I'm going to call it Teferi's Protection new. But there's phasing has sort of come back in vogue.
It has. They brought phasing back out of, I wouldn't have guessed.
We hadn't seen it in like 15 years, and then lately we've seen a few cards. So there's Teferi's Protection, of course, and also Clever Concealment, which is a very popular sort of newish spell. Both phase out your board. So explain to me what happens if I steal all of Jimmy's stuff with Call for Aid and then phase it out.
I have now checked this with the internet and 2 people on staff.
2 of our rules experts.
Because we were like,
how's that work?
I don't know. So what happens is you can phase out the stuff that you control, and it will come back on your untap step, how phasing normally works. But it doesn't return to your battlefield. It returns to its owner's battlefield. Because the until end of turn clause wears off regardless of if the permanents are there or not. So when they come, like, they're still technically on the battlefield and around to see these kinds of things. So I think they're just phased out sort of under... Like they go under the veil and then they sneak back to their opponent's control.
Jimmy's now again.
Yeah, but they don't come back until your upkeep. So it's still, or your untap, excuse me. So you still get to like remove them for a full turn cycle until your next upkeep.
So you do sort of shields down that person for a full rotation of the table, because they would normally get the creatures back at the end of your turn, but the phasing would make it come back at the beginning of your next turn.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so that's not the worst, and those are cards that
definitely get played
a ton. So if you have those 2 cards in your deck, all of a sudden Call for Aid looks a lot better.
What I really wanted to do was I was like, there's got to be a card that says just everything fights. Like all the stuff fights. And there is, and it's not very good. But it's Citizen Tactics is 1 and a green, and it costs green. It has Strive, and it costs green more to cast for each target beyond the first. It says until end of turn, any number of target creatures get +1/+1 and gain tap. This creature fights another target creature. And it's so funny to steal their creatures and then just have all of their creatures enter bad fights.
Fight each other.
Just fight each other, and they all die. You could take out other opponents' creatures with them, but they trade. It becomes this really wild turn.
You force a brawl where you're board.
Yeah, it's like a strange goading. Feels very Gruul to be like, I'm going to borrow you. We're gonna go hang out, and then you're gonna fight all that stuff.
That's funny.
So you can force into a lot of bad fights.
A thing I was thinking about were the chaos cards and the cards that say like, however many permanents you control, shuffle them into your deck, and then you kind of like Great Aurora, Warp World. And I was looking at those cards and they don't work. It makes sense, right? They don't want you shuffling your opponent's cards into your library.
Right.
So those 2 cards don't work. But I came across Whims of Fate, which you'll remember from a very early episode of Game Nights.
I remember this
Craig
one.
gets blown out by this card. It says, starting with you, each player separates all permanents he or she controls into 3 piles. Then each player chooses one of his or her piles at random and sacrifices those permanents.
You can't sack them.
Oh, it's sacrifice. Oh, I thought it was destroyed.
Oh, no.
Whims of Fate is also no good, as it turns out.
All right. Well.
Yeah, that's gone.
All right. So there's another clause
you should watch that old episode of Game Nights, though.
Yeah, it's really
pretty
good.
Funny. Okay.
And watching Craig get got. He's such a sweet guy. And it's like,
Because the one thing people do with Whims of Fate, I just on a side tangent, is they just put all their permanents in one pile and leave the other 2 empty.
Yeah, they have 33% chance.
Rather than 100% chance to lose some stuff, you have 33% or 66% chance to lose nothing.
To lose nothing, yeah.
And we'll let you guess what happens to Craig.
You'll never guess.
Okay.
So the other clause on these is that you cannot attack that player, but that doesn't mean that you can't deal damage to them. There's a couple of exceptions sort of to this rule, starting with Saskia, the Unyielding. When she enters, you choose a player, and then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to the chosen player. So if you're a Saskia player, you can be like, you're the chosen player, give me all your stuff. And then send it at the other players, and it'll still deal that much damage.
Probably take out both.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Saskia seems really sweet here. Kedis does a similar thing, and the interesting thing, it says when a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent.
Right.
It doesn't say you're a commander.
Oh, so you can. Oh, you're taking their commander probably.
Yeah.
It's out.
So you would steal their deck, and then the commander is also doubled and will deal damage to each person.
That's cool. Okay, I like that. Saskia actually makes me think it goes in a Saskia deck.
I would think it goes in a Saskia deck. It feels quite good there.
I mean, Mob Rule is already like a mainstay in the Saskia deck. So yeah.
This one is expensive. It's an 8-mana white enchantment, but it also says creatures you control have Myriad.
Oh boy.
So I love this one because you can kill their legendary stuff with it.
Oh yeah.
So if you give your whole board Myriad and you attack with their stuff, and then you keep the token copies and they lose the originals and don't gain, and you're not sacrificing them, they just die.
That's
the legendary
nice.
rule.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Also, you could just deal a lot of damage to everybody that way. They don't have a lot of legendaries. Yeah.
So Legion Loyalty seems quite good if you're already running Legion Loyalty, of course.
Yeah, okay. I was looking for ways that weren't attacking, that like didn't make you attack. There's like Fury Stoked Giants and Lightning Volley, which give your creatures the ability to tap and like deal damage 2 or 1, which isn't a lot. But if they had a lot of creatures, you might be able to do it. I don't know. I was just looking for any way around the attacking clause. That one's harder to get around. There's
definitely creatures that say, like, creatures you control, tap for mana. Like, if you have that kind of stuff, and just stealing 6 creatures and having, or more than 6, hopefully.
It's got to be a lot more because you're spending 5.
You're spending 5 to do it, but you still, get them. I don't know. If you have a deck that cares about the number of creatures you control, if you're running something like Mob Justice that deals 1 damage to target player for each creature you control, it does give you hypothetically another 5-6 creatures or something like that.
Yeah, this card is cool. I love Mob Rule and I play it quite a bit. It will save you in a lot of situations. It will kill the archenemy a lot of times.
Doesn't do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think I'm replacing my Mob Rule with this card, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes somewhere else. I think if you're playing an aggro deck or you're playing if you're playing Minsk and Boo or you're playing Saskia, not Minsk and Boo, Minsk the beloved. Just Minsk.
Yeah,
Minsk on his
whatever.
own. Then there's some cool things you can do with this card.
All right, cool.
Moving on. All right, this next one is Cavern-Hoard Dragon for 7 red for a dragon. That's a 6/6. That sounds like a lot. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. It also has flying and trample and haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls.
So a lot of comparisons being drawn to Dockside Extortionist.
It's not Dockside Extortionist.
No, it is not.
Thank goodness.
This is like what Dockside maybe should have been originally.
A 9-mana dragon, yes.
Yeah. Well, a fair thing.
Yeah, that has to deal combat damage.
Yeah, exactly. Even with haste.
Yeah, it's not Dockside. It's not close to Dockside. It's closer to the dragons that just make treasures when they do stuff, in my opinion.
It's closer to Goldspan.
Yeah, which is... I think those are the real comparisons that you make. You compare it to Goldspan Dragon or Ancient Copper Dragon or even something like Etsushi, which is the 4-mana one that when it dies, it makes 3 treasures.
Yeah.
Because it's still a big, hasty flyer that is going to go in those kind of decks.
Will make you a bunch of treasure, has to jump through more hoops, and won't make you as many treasures. Dockside is harder to sort of loop recursion thing because you can't attack multiple times in a turn most of the time. So yeah, a lot of things sort of keeping it under wraps, which I like, but it is still pretty powerful.
I think it is still quite powerful. I would say it's less reliable than something like Goldspan or Etsushi, where you can't really guarantee that it's going to do what you want it to do in your deck, but it is more effective than something like an Ancient Copper Dragon, which I don't love as a card, and it's because it has haste.
Yeah.
And trample.
It's because Ancient Copper Dragon doesn't have haste.
Doesn't have haste. Yeah, it's because Cavern-Hoard Dragon specifically has haste, flying, trample, and those are the keywords that say I am gonna connect.
Well, the interesting thing too about the Cavern-Hoard Dragon is it sort of doubles up on how good it is depending on how many artifacts a single opponent has. Right. So if one of your opponents is playing an artifact deck, this becomes an insane card because you could conceivably cast it for red and get 7, 8, 9, 10 treasure off of it when connecting. So the variability, because if you're then playing in a pod where nobody's playing an artifact deck and the most artifacts your opponent have is 2 or 3, then all of a sudden it's going to cost still 7. It's going to give you 2 treasure. It gets a lot worse. So it really is, volatile in like how good it is from game to game. It's variable, which I like. We did some gameplay stats last year and they were relevant to this discussion, so I looked them up. I had my assistant at the time for I forget which card sort of look at the last like 20 to 30 games of game nights and extra turns, and I had them look at the end of the 5th turn, so the end of the 5th turn cycle, and we asked the question, on average, how many artifacts does each player have? And what were the chances that at least one player had 3 or more artifacts? And what we found out was that on average, players had about 1.6 artifacts at the end of the 5th turn. And there was a 42% chance that one player or more would have 3 artifacts. Okay. So if you're saying the end of the 5th turn cycle, 3 artifacts in play, it's not quite 50%. And that would make this dragon cost 6, which means you could conceivably cast it the next turn. So yeah, under those stats, and again, listen, take those stats with a grain of salt, right? Like it's just better than nothing. Yeah. Really look at 30 games, it gives you some sort of way to corral the information. But if you look at those stats, it looks a little bit worse, I think, than I was thinking in my head. Yeah. I don't tend to play a ton of artifacts, and it's definitely a meta thing where it's like everybody plays Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, or everybody plays all the two mana rocks that they can. Then those
those play groups, this card is going to be better than if you're still like my play group is still largely mana ramp.
Yeah.
Or just, hitting land drops. It's not a super rampy format. So I know that Cavern-Hoard Dragon is going to be expensive a lot of the time. And the question is, like, are you happy with this being a, 6 or 7 mana, 6/6 flying haste that makes you 2 to 3 treasures?
Yeah, how good is it if it costs 4 red and makes you 3 treasures? It's not the worst.
I don't think it's terrible.
It's a 6/6 dragon that basically costs 3 mana.
Right. You do value that body more, though. Because you're like, okay, the 6/6 flying trample is like a big chunk of that.
They do have to get rid of it, too, because the second time it hits and makes another 3 treasure, it has been kind of insane now. It was free to cast 6/6 flyer.
Right. And if it has trample, if it has double strike, there are decks that can really make this thing worth its salt. Yeah. Where it's like, this is if you can turn this into a more reliable ancient copper dragon with double strike or with trample, that just means this card is great.
So I think it does need a little support, though, like you're saying. So you should have a way to really take advantage of it, some way to give it double strike or something like that.
Yeah.
It's probably, or cheat it out. Maybe you've got sneak attack in your deck or something like that. Then it becomes a lot better, right? Because it's out of nowhere 1 mana, boom, get 5 mana back or whatever. And sometimes it's going to be nuts, right? Somebody's going to have gone off and there's a bunch of food tokens running around now. I think treasure tokens from your opponents are less reliable because they can sack them in response. But yeah, somebody just got that new Hobbit deck and they're like, I got 12 food, I'm feeling happy. And you're like, cool, play this thing for 2 red, make 12 treasure, win game now. And they're like, crap. Yeah.
And it's worth mentioning that if they can't stack their treasures in response to you casting it to make it more expensive.
Only in response to getting it
into getting hit with it. So they can reduce the number of treasures you have. But if they have 9 treasures when you cast it, it costs 2. I'm talking a lot of smack about Ancient Copper Dragon. Ancient Copper Dragon is great if you can cheat it into play, if you can give it haste, if you can give it trample. Obviously, there are places where Ancient Copper Dragon is very good. I like Cavern-Hoard Dragon better than Ancient Copper Dragon because it has fewer things that it needs to make it good.
The floor is higher.
I agree.
Yeah. Ancient Copper Dragon's very often you hold it in your hand and you're like, it'll do nothing.
It'll do nothing. It'll eat a removal spell most of the time.
Maybe.
Yeah. Or they will chump all day.
Yep.
I do like this card in decks that give your opponents artifacts. This is the other thing I wanted to mention with this deck. Because there are a lot of those that have been printed lately, like Wernog Rider's Champion, which is the do you want a clue? And if you make a clue, I make a clue. Yeah. And there are just more artifacts running around.
So you trick them into getting enough artifacts where this becomes a lot better. Yeah, that's good. Because you can reliably, because you get that 1.6 number up to it's 1.6 normally, but I'm going to give them 2 artifacts.
I'm going to give them stuff.
Yeah,
so Kathleen just played Rankle and Torbrand on Game Nights Live. And that card, when it hits, it gives everybody treasure tokens. So you're all automatically raising that floor there.
That's great. All right. Next one is called, this is one of my favorite arts from the new set.
It's so beautiful.
Dawn of a New Age. It's 1 and white for an enchantment. Dawn of a New Age enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from Dawn of a New Age. If you do, draw a card. Then, if Dawn of a New Age has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it, and you gain 4 life. Man, you run out of hope. That's a little sad.
It is a little sad.
Yeah.
But what I like about it is that it sacrifices itself.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time when we see this kind of effect, it's like exile at end of turn and it's gone. You gained the 4 life, but you
can't do this again.
Yeah. But this is in your graveyard.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's enchantment. There's a lot of sort of recursion for enchantments. There's a lot of recursion for permanents that are low CMC.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I like Dawn of a New Age for a lot of reasons. And I like it more than these cards that we're going to talk about real quick because...
You like it more than all of the new cards we're about to talk about?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
So the first comparison that I thought of was Investigator's Journal, which just says the same thing. It's like ETB, put counters on it equal to the number of creatures you control.
Creatures a player controls.
So player controls. So it can go in more decks, but you have to pay 2 and tap it to draw the card.
I don't like this card at all because it's 4 for your first card and 6 for your second, no matter what.
Yeah.
And you have another hoop to jump through. People have to add enough creatures for it to get a bunch of counters. Yeah.
I run this in my Investigator deck, and I found it quite bad.
Yeah. Mazemind Tome is a similar card. It's 2 mana for an artifact. You can tap it, put a page counter on it, and scry 1, or you can pay 2, tap it, put a page counter on it, and draw a card. And then once it has 4 or more page counters on it, you exile it and you gain 4 life. This is a very close comp. But again, it's 4 mana for your first card, 6 for your second.
There is a free way to use it,
yeah,
but it's just not quite getting there. Because, like, Dawn of a New Age is 2 mana for your first card, assuming you have a creature
You'll never
in
pay in
control.
more mana. It doesn't cost mana to do anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's 2 mana for your first, 2 mana for your second. It looks closer to me to Idol of Oblivion, which is the 2 mana artifact that when you tap it, you draw a card if you've made a token this turn.
Yeah.
So it's more of a conditional draw spell that draws you 1 card a turn if you're doing something.
Making tokens, yeah.
So it looks much closer to Idol of Oblivion, which I love.
Yeah, and that is a card we see a lot because it is so good and efficient.
So cheap.
Yeah. If you've drawn 3 cards off it, you've paid 2 mana for those 3 cards. Yeah. No, you have to jump through a hoop in order to qualify, but still. And another card that I think we see a lot and is kind of in the middle of those Investigator's Journal and Mazemind Tome and Idol of Oblivion as far as mana cost is Tome of Legends, which is 2 mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield with page counter on it, but whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attacks, you put another page counter on it. And then you can pay 1, tap it, and remove a page counter to draw a card. So it always has 1, and then as long as you play your commander once each game, you're going to get a second one. And you find that it's not that hard, to get counters on by attacking or recasting your commander.
Yeah.
And so you do play an additional mana. So it's 3 mana for your first card, 4 mana to draw 2 cards, 5 mana to draw 3. But somewhere in there that becomes efficient enough.
It becomes quite good.
Yeah, where we're happy with it.
I'm usually happy with Tome of Legends, where I haven't had a ton of luck in Commander with Investigator's Journal or Mazemind Tome.
Yeah.
Idol of Oblivion being great. I'm usually quite happy with Tome of Legends. I run it in a number of decks. But it is closer to something like a Phyrexian Arena, just an enchantment that sits in play and draws you a card every single turn. Except it's 2 mana and it draws on your end step.
Yeah.
But you have to have a creature in play.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to evaluate because there's a lot of hoops. On rate, it looks better than a lot of these other cards that we just talked about because it's 2 mana, and then you never pay any more mana, and if you're able to draw 2 or 3 cards off of it, you feel pretty good. But when do you play this card is the tough part. Because if you think about Idol of Oblivion and Tome of Legends, the one we like, you can play them before you do the thing, and then draw the cards as a result. Dawn of a New Age, you have to play after you've done the thing, which is create creatures, and then draw cards. But the problem with that is like card draw cards get worse later in the game because you won't have as much time for the return on your investment to play off. So imagine Phyrexian Arena, it's very good when you draw it on turn 3 and play it, but it's not good on turn 7 because there's not going to be enough turns remaining in the game for that to pay off for you. And that's my worry with Dawn of a New Age is it doesn't give you a good... You can't play it on 2, probably. Maybe if you're in a Yoshimaru Rogue deck.
Sure. But
in general, you don't have... Maybe you got 1 creature on turn 2, probably not 2. So when do you play it? You got to wait till you got more creatures. So now you're playing on turn 4 or something. That's a lot later than I want my card draw spell like this to probably come. So yeah, I have a hard time sort of understanding the play pattern that's going to really pay off for me. So when I read this card, I was excited about it, and now I'm kind of less excited as a result.
it's interesting because what I like about Dawn of a New Age is it really fits how I play white decks, which is I like to have these efficient, like your Esper Sentinels and these cheap little creatures, and especially the ones that sacrifice to do stuff, Cathar Commando, and those, I really like permanent based stuff in my white decks. So I do have a lot of low to the ground creatures because I rely on effects like Sun Titan and Savin's Reclamation to recur and get the most value out of those cards. So that's
which
where...
are great with Dawn of a New Age as well.
Exactly.
Because you do have to sack it. So even if you play, that little loop makes sense to me because you're like, I play little low to the ground stuff. I'm willing to cast Dawn of a New Age to only put 2 counters on it because I have 2 or 3 cards in my deck that will bring it back to the battlefield at some point later to get additional value out of it. Yeah. I like that.
That's definitely where I see this, and I think that says a lot about why white's good and how to build a really strong white deck, is relying on those cards like Sun Titan, Savin's Reclamation, or even I really love the Restoration of a Ganjo, which is puts a plains in your hand and then you can discard a card to put it into play. So often it's discard that plains, get a plains into play. But you could discard an Esper Sentinel, you could discard a Cathar Commando, you could discard Dawn of a New Age, or you could discard that plains and get back anything that was in your graveyard which could be that Dawn.
I really like the things that say if it's gone to the graveyard this turn, bring it back. So Brought Back is a really good one.
Great.
I use it a lot with fetch lands and things as ramp. A lot of times it's hard to line up 2 fetch lands, so it'd be nice to be like fetch land, Dawn of a New Age goes to the graveyard this turn, get those both back onto the battlefield. So I've ramped, set up my card draw again for the next 4 turns. Yeah, those are nice loops.
Yeah.
So it requires certain synergies, I think.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think it's a slam dunk into every white deck, but honestly, I'm pretty happy with this card if I draw 2 cards off of it. Because it's 2 mana, you draw 2 now, and then on your next step, and you gain 4 life. Like, even that is perfectly fine. It's only 2 mana.
Yeah. I think the floor is kind of low, but drawing 2 over the course of 2 turns is just a lot different than like Night's Whisper, which is like draw 2 right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
Where you lose 2.
Yeah, and it's also end step, right? So, and I was going to say that about Tome of Legends and Idol of Oblivion. There's more upside to them. They're a lot better to draw late in the game as well because, hey, listen, I don't need the mana as much. I just need more options or cards. I'm looking for that board wipe or whatever it is. I get to tap it right now and use it and get a card and see 1 deeper in my deck, whereas Dawn of a New Age says end step, do it, which is nice. It's better than your upkeep waiting a whole turn, but at the same time, unless it's an instant, I don't get to use it this turn. So if I draw it, we're never really hellbent in Commander, but often at end of games, you need specific things to sort of have a chance to win, and this doesn't really help you do that either.
That's true. It does make this turn better.
Yeah. So I think it's a good card, but it's not like an all white decks are going to want it type of card. You need some synergy around it.
You know what's interesting that I just realized? It gives you the Monarch. Because you're the king. Like, that's why you draw on your end step. That's the joke here.
It's interesting. It doesn't actually give you the Monarch.
It doesn't actually give you the Monarch, but you're drawing on your end step like the Monarch.
That's cool.
All right.
You want to read the next one?
Let's do it. It's Elven Chorus. 3 and a green for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library, and creatures you control add 1 mana of any color.
So it just has Cryptolith Rite stapled on there at the end of Future Sight, kind of?
It's Vizier of the Menagerie with a Cryptolith Rite.
For the same mana cost as Vizier, though, so you just get a free Cryptolith Rite.
Yeah, it's basically Vizier of the,
Yeah, you can't spend mana as though it's mana of any color, but
that's okay.
That's okay, because
you can normally cast those creatures. Yeah, you have the fixing. This card is wild. Like all of these are effects that we want in Commander. Yeah. All of these are on very common cards. Do
you want ramp and card draw?
I
heard somewhere that you want those things, and this has both of them.
It has both of them on a 4 mana enchantment. It's like we play Realm Walker, we play Augur of Autumn, I don't play Vizier of the Menagerie anymore, but I do play Vivian Monster's Advocate, which has that you can cast creatures off the top of your library thing. So and
just sort of branching into Elsh of the Infinite, Future Sight territory.
Yeah.
And the thing I think people miss when they're newer about cards like this is if you play the top card of your library and it's a creature, and then you look and the next one's a creature, you play that. And then if you look and it's a creature, so sometimes you rip 3 cards in a row off this, and that's the equivalent of drawing those cards and casting them, right? Now sometimes you hit a land or something else, and then you're a little bit stuck, but still you can often have crazy turns. Anybody who's seen a Bolus of Citadel or whatever can see the lands don't always stop you, and there's ways around it, obviously. But the card
and if there's creatures and they have haste, you're casting the creature. Now it taps for mana to cast your next thing. It essentially makes all your creatures cost 1 less.
This is something I really like because a lot of times these effects, Vizier of the Menagerie, I'll just use as an example. You play it and then you don't have enough mana to really use it that turn because you're like, look, it is a creature, but because I cost 4 for this thing, I only got 1 left or whatever. But because it makes your creatures tap for mana, it kind of gives you the mana to be able to use it right away. And then you're like, look, and you're like, yep, I'll just tap these other 3 creatures to cast this now. Cryptolith Rite, one of the best cards in the format. So, a little bit of card draw staple to it for a little extra cost seems good.
Yeah, I mean, what I like most about this card is it combines really well with green cards we already love to play, like Oracle of Moldiah and Courser of Kruphix, where
See, now you can get past the lands.
Now you can get past the lands. Like green is very good at getting past the lands. There's also the Rada, the red-green one that plays lands
Sylvan
off the top.
Library is lets you sort of stack it.
You've got a lot of scrying green after all of this elf stuff. You can find the creatures to do it.
Yeah.
It does mean that you want a high density of creatures in your deck.
Yeah, that's always my big question with cards like this, which are how many creatures should be in your deck before you consider playing this card. Because if you've got 20 creatures, you can't play this card.
Yeah.
It just, a 1 in 5 chance to cast a card off. And also, you don't have very many creatures that are going to get the tap for mana bonus.
Tap to add mana, yeah.
Yeah, I always think it's around 30 plus before I start thinking about cards like this.
Right.
Ideally 35 or so.
The frustrating thing about Elven Chorus to me, and the reason that I don't have a deck that I want to slam it into, is it's an enchantment that goes in a creature deck.
Yeah.
And we've got, like I said, the Vivian, that's a planeswalker that wants to go in a creature deck. These non-creature spells that want to go in decks with high density of creatures, I'm like, I would just sort of rather a creature in that slot. I've got a lot of, like, I've got Guardian projects and stuff where I would rather cast another creature instead.
Please don't make a Guardian Project creature, though. Just
don't. I mean, they made Beast Whisperer.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Which is not the same, but it's close.
This tug and pull is nice, though. I think that's good design, right? Where it's like, I want this benefit, but it will have this downside.
Is it worth the slot?
How I weigh that is interesting because you're going to weigh it differently than me, than somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has to really earn its non-creature spot in these creature-y decks. And it's close. I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. 4 mana is a lot, and the 4 mana spot is crowded. And it's crazy to think that a card like this could be crowded out by stuff that already exists. But
right?
I do kind of agree with you.
You look at the things on this card and you're like, it has to be amazing.
Right.
And then you're like, but where am I going to put it? Is this better than Guardian Project?
I don't think so.
I don't think it's better than Guardian Project.
It's definitely not better than just drawing a card. Yeah. But the thing is, it does give the Cryptolith Rite effect. I think it becomes better when you have 35 plus creatures in your deck. And it's probably worse if you're below that, or at least below 30 creatures. And 35 is a lot.
35 is a lot.
Not very many of your decks have 35 creatures in them. So that
mine do. But I love
creatures. That puts it in a very specific like category, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to say.
This may seem obvious, but I do like it in an elf deck.
Yeah.
A lot of mana. You already have the haste enablers, and they're cheap creatures.
It's interesting because most elves don't get much benefit from the Cryptolith Rite part,
they don't really. Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know. I think in that case, maybe Guardian. Well, you probably already have Guardian Projects. So
yeah,
it's not
elves
like
have
one for the
tokens
other.
and stuff, though. It turns on all those.
True. Yeah.
Anyway, it's very interesting, and I think it's quite good. Right. You can tell us where you put him.
All right, let's go to the next one here. Which
Speaking of elves,
Galadhrim Ambush. It's 3 and a green, so 4 mana for an instant. It says create X 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Prevents all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-elf creatures.
Okay. So the first comparison that everybody's been making with this card is Arachnogenesis.
That's what I think of immediately.
Which is 2 and a green for an instant that says put X 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures attacking you.
Yep. Prevent
all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. Okay, so there's some very important differences between Arachnogenesis and Galadhrim's Ambush.
Right.
Starting with 1 is 3 mana and 1 is 4 mana.
Which is a huge amount when talking about a reactionary spell like this, too.
Yeah. And the other big one that I wanted to highlight first is non-elf is significantly worse than non-spider in terms of defensive
because there's just a lot more elves.
There's a lot more elves running around. So, like, if somebody has a bunch of, like, incidental elves and they cast a Craterhoof, you could not fog 2 of those cards because it's just
they're
a big
way
wood elf
less
or something
likely
like
to be
that.
attacking you with a bunch of spiders than
right.
themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I think both of those make this a significantly worse defensive like fog.
Than Arachnogenesis.
Because it's more expensive and because it doesn't protect you against a very common creature type.
Well, and the spiders, let's just say, are a little better than the elves.
They are, yeah.
In a vacuum. They're 1/2s with reach.
Higher toughness.
Yeah.
They gang up on stuff better. Yeah. The reach matters. But Arachnogenesis says creatures attacking you.
Yeah.
And this says attacking creatures generally.
Yeah.
Which means it can be used in a lot more places.
Right. In fact, when you're attacking, right?
When you're attacking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the part I missed. When you put that down, I was like, oh, I didn't think about it. Because you think of fogs as like, someone attacks me, I don't take any damage.
Great.
We're okay. And this is like plus a bonus, you know?
Yeah.
Not as good as Ink Shield, but still, like, you get something. And I didn't think of it as like, oh, what if I attack with a lot of things and get a bonus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has that utility where it's like it can be a defensive spell that gives you a whole board in a box, or it can be like I have a board and I want to swing out with it and I'm just going to double the number of creatures I have.
And it makes this attack pretty safe because I likely have all elves. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to take damage. They will do damage. and now I make a bunch of elves, and it's not like I had to like chump attack, is that a thing? Them in.
I wrote this down and I just confused myself, but I just realized what I meant. It says you can hold this until after blocks. Yeah. So Arachnogenesis, you want to cast it before blocks, get all the spiders and block with all the spiders.
And not take damage and kill her stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but this one, you can attack, have them make all the blocks, then fog the spell and double your board. So if they make blocks not knowing how big your board is, they make blocks not knowing that it's gonna be a one-sided fog. It gives you this like huge surprise where you're like, oh, I was trying to kill as many things and suddenly they have twice as many things.
Well, you can also use this when your opponent attacks another opponent.
Yeah.
After damage, but before combat's over, right?
Yeah.
Are they, because they're still considered attackers at that point.
Oh yeah, anytime in combat.
Yeah, so Rachel attacks Jimmy. Whatever happens, Jimmy takes the damage. I go, well, we're still in combat. It's the same thing as reconnaissance, which people, they argue with this all the time, but you just, and you go, boom, I'm just going to use this as a token creation device purely because I didn't want to stop any damage that was going to happen. And then I make all the elves, and then, I've got a Reese the Redeemed or something. I double it. I do whatever I'm going to do.
Right.
Or maybe that's the turn before my turn, and now I'm going to untap with twice as much stuff as you thought. Or maybe even more than twice, because maybe Rachel has 20 creatures and I've got 4. Yeah. And now I've got 24. So, yeah. This also, if she attacked with all of them.
This also, I was like, where are the situations that I want this? And I kind of love it for Scootsworm decks.
Oh,
because Scootsworm decks are like, I got it. I got 125 Scootsworms, and you're like,
40 at you, 40 at you, 40 at you,
and you're like, I'll make 120 and block 40 of them, and now I have 80.
I don't have to block. Your things aren't even dealing damage.
That's true. They won't deal. They won't deal damage after. It's.
I mean, I can't to kill them, but yeah.
Yeah, you can kill a whole bunch of them. And I was like, that's a scenario where I'm like, I got them.
Anything that's good against Scootsworm, I like.
I do want to bring up Flurry of Wings because I love this spell, and it doesn't see a ton of play because it's green, white, blue, and it is a little narrow, but it's an instant that says put X11 white bird soldier creature tokens with flying into play, where X is the number of attacking creatures. This is a spell I used to run in Feldergriff when it was more of a goatee deck. And if they're attacking with like 10 creatures and you make 10 1/1 flyers, that's a huge amount of defense, and you can do that defensively and block all their stuff with the flyers, or you can do it if they're attacking somebody else and suddenly have a board. I think Flurry of Wings is a cute spell, and Galadhrim Ambush is that plus this fog utility.
Yeah. Do you think that this, though, will see any play outside of like a dedicated elf deck? Because it seems like you're going to run Arachnogenesis if you want this effect over it in anything that's not elves. And even Arachnogenesis is kind of fading, right? Like we don't see it as much as we used to.
Right. There's so many good fogs that this is a really competitive spot as a defensive spell. I think it has to be an offensive. You have to have offensive utility to be running this one over any of the other fogs.
Do you think, though, in that case, though, it could still just go in a generic, like, token deck? Like, I'm going to create enough things, and they might be warriors and soldiers, but I could use elves, too?
I think it has a home in token decks. I think it's going to be, like, a very go-wide deck, like a Scootsworm deck, or it's got to be an elf-dedicated deck, where this is, for sure, a one-sided board wipe, minus a couple of their utility elves, probably.
All right, interesting.
Yep. All right, we're going to move on to the next one, which is Horn of the Mock. I like this card a lot. It's a 2-mana legendary artifact. It says, whenever 2 or more creatures you control attack a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This has the same problem we were just talking about, where it's a non-creature spell that wants creatures.
This is once less creatures. You
look at 5 cards.
Yeah, the floor of, well, it's not the floor. The floor is it does nothing. But the sort of minimal usage, which is like I just attack 1 player with 2 creatures. I look at the top 5. I get the thing. Like, that's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
We should note, though, that it's easy to misread the card. If you attack your 3 opponents with 2 creatures each, you will trigger this 3 times.
Yes.
And you will look at the top 5 and then do that again and then do that again. So you look at the top 15 and pull 3 creatures out if you don't whiff.
Right.
Which is powerful and a little more powerful than some of the comps that we're going to have for it.
Yeah, they've been playing with this kind of design a lot, and it hasn't quite stuck yet.
Yeah, I want to say before we talk about the comps that, like, you like the card, I also like the card, which is interesting because we're going to talk about the comps, and none of the comps see much play. So the discussion of why we like this version of the card is going to be interesting.
It's also a lot of the comparisons are fairly new cards. So it's possible
they haven't worked their way in yet.
Picked up steam. Like Chivalric Alliance is 1 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card, and then it has an ability you can discard a card and make a knight. Firemane Commando says whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. Whenever another player attacks with 2 or more creatures, they draw a card if none of those creatures are attacking you. That's a 4-mana angel. There's also a blue one, weirdly, that I've never seen before. It's Military Intelligence, 1 and a blue. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. Blue.
Maybe they were just trying to give blue a reason to
attack.
And it's like, hey, you're blue. You don't need a card, draw a card.
It's also called Military Intelligence. I guess intelligence is blue.
Yeah, you just play a card that just says draw cards. Like, you don't need this thing that
makes
you jump through hoops.
I don't think Military Intelligence is the oldest of those 3, and it sees no play because there's way better ways to draw cards in blue. I
want to note that according to EDH Rec, Chivalric Alliance sees play in about 3% of possible decks it could go in. Mm-hmm. Military Intelligence is 1%, and Firemane Commando is 2%. So this is an effect that right now is seeing very little play.
Yeah.
So, then listen, I agree with you. I like the card too, but as I'm evaluating, I'm like, should I like it?
I know. You're like, do I just like looking at the top 5 and picking the best card out of that? Because that sounds great. To be fair, Horn of the Mark is significantly better than Chivalric Alliance and Military Intelligence because you can draw up to 3 cards. You're looking at 5, picking the best one. You could whiff, so there's that. But
it's colorless, so it goes in more decks. Yeah, I do agree it's significantly better than those 2. Mm. So what kind of deck does it go in was a question I had. I think, low CMC partner commanders are pretty good because Yoshimaru Rogrok, of course, is a really good one because that's 1 mana total for 2 creatures and they can attack pretty early. But even if you've got like a Tymna deck with another partner or something like that, that's going to have 2 bodies that are going to come out, and I kind of guarantee that I'm going to be wanting to attack early. I think that makes me more likely to want to play something like this than if I have a 7 CMC commander that's by itself kind of thing.
Right.
Again, a lot depends on what's in the deck, but I think you could have a low creature density but still have 2 low CMC partner commanders and think about playing this card.
I like it in decks that have evasive tokens as well, that know they have a ton of creatures and know they're going to have a lot of free attacks. I think this one's pretty good in like my Pia Nilar, not Pia Nilar, it's the new Pia console of the Pia. They'll find it. It's the red-white one from Aftermath. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
She's a console.
I don't know. I can't remember the names of any cards anymore. There's so many.
It's an Aftermath. Yeah. It's the new Pia. She's great and makes Thopters with haste.
Right, yep.
Or the Esper Fairy Commander. When you cast artifacts or enchantments.
No. Nope, that's the
It's I was thinking the same thing. Elsha, but that's not it.
It starts with an A or an E.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Whenever you cast a non-creature or a spell, you make a 1/1.
Yeah, either it's artifact or enchantment.
Alayla.
We were close.
Alayla. Yep, totally didn't look it up on my phone just now.
Yeah. Alayla. It seems very good in that because it's an artifact and you get those tokens out of it.
You're right. It's artifact or enchantment. It's not a non-creature.
Yeah. I was like, she doesn't just make fairies when you cast instants, does she? That seems crazy. It's also quite good in decks that care about attacking, of course. Like, I think this goes in Ishin decks, the double attack triggers, so it triggers twice. Or the Gruul one, Wolfgar of Icewind Dale, which sees significantly less play.
Turns out that 2 color is not as good as 3. And
it's 5 mana versus 3 mana. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
I realized I said earlier, maybe you think about it in low creature count decks with 2 partners, but you can only find creatures in the top 5, so you still need a high creature count.
You still need a decent creature count.
You need 30 plus creatures again to run this because it's not going to find anything otherwise. And also, without creatures, how are you attacking with 2 or more creatures? So,
in the Winota list, you look at the top 6, and we have like 21 hits for it.
Yeah.
So I think it doesn't have to be quite as high as like 30, 35. But
I guess close. 20 is 5 to 1.
Yeah.
Right? Out of 100.
Yeah.
So that gives you some sort of math reasons that 20 is about right.
20.
Yeah. I think you want probably more like 25 to feel good about it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to move on to another.
Oh, it's my playmat.
Big green spells, and it's so dramatic. I love it so much.
It's Last March of the Ents. 6 green, 8 mana for a sorcery. This spell can't be countered. Draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. Then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield.
Okay, so it's a Rishkar's Expertise-ish plus a Sylvala Stampede-ish.
Can't be countered-ish. I want to note, it can't be countered, but they can kill your biggest creature in in response to it being put on the stack. So it's not like it's guaranteed to do its thing. So just have more than one creature when you cast it, probably. Still look out for open mana, but yeah, it can't be countered.
Yeah. Keep an eye on your guy. My boyfriend has a Multani Marrow Sorcerer deck, and it's a Eureka deck.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like draw a bunch of cards equal to power and toughness and use Eureka to put a ton of stuff into play.
Yeah,
and I saw Last March of the Ents, and I was like, oh my god, it's Rich Gross Expertise plus a Eureka. And it has a Tree Folk on it. It's so perfect for Multani Marrow Sorcerer. And we love these like big green sorceries that put a ton of stuff into play. This is like a Genesis Wave plus card draw.
Yeah, another thing to note is the cards you already had in hand can also be the creatures that are put on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So sometimes it might be right to cast it even if you only have a 2/2 if you already have cool stuff in your hand and you can just cheat that right onto the battlefield. Yeah.
Right.
So that part of it is interesting because Genesis Wave or something like that is only from library into play. This is like, well, if you got a Blightsteel in there in your hand right now, feel free to put it right out.
It can come down right away. Yeah, I think this is going to be the kind of card that we see in decks that have real big commanders. So ones that you have guaranteed access to, like a 12/12. The Galta and Mavrin.
Yeah.
Like I said, Multani.
Draw 12, put all the creatures into play.
Yeah, that seems fine. Notably, it is the toughness. So something like Gorm the Great is a 2/7 for 4 mana. So you would draw 7 cards from this and put as many into play as you have.
Probably good in like Tree Folk then.
Definitely Tree Folk deck. There's a lot of like cheaper stuff with really high toughness, like Kinaios and Tiro.
Yep.
Are like 2/10s or 2/8s or something like that. Yeah. So it's great in a deck like that. Toughness matters in this case rather than power. Lady's really excited about it for her Abomination of Llanowar deck.
Because Abomination is huge.
Because Abomination is already enormous, and elves are a high density of creatures. So if you draw like 15 cards,
dump 10 elves on the board.
Yeah, that's wild. So again, you do need high density of creatures or just big creatures that you want to put into play.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to be really good paired with red because if one of those creatures gives the rest of your creatures haste or something like that, like wait until you got Urbrask in your hand, then cast it because you can win off the back of it. So speaking
of Praetors, this goes with Zopandrel Hunger Dominus for sure.
Oh.
He's a 4/6, but after combat, he's an 8/12.
I want to draw 12 and just put all the creatures into play.
Yeah.
I was
after
thinking,
combat, though.
Yeah, you really want to give this flash, actually, I think. Yeah. And that's why. Because, for one thing, you want to cast it at a moment where it's the least vulnerable to removing your creature, because I would still be scared of them getting rid of my big thing. But also, you really want to do it, end step, put all the stuff in play. Now I don't need the haste component, right? I just untap and go. So, Alchemist Refuge is probably my favorite of the bunch, because it's in green already, and it doesn't cost you like a spell slot in your deck. Obviously, Vodalcanori and stuff are tough to play these days. I've already talked about it.
Yeah.
I wanted some additional like value. There's a new card though, Born Upon a Wind, from Lord of the Rings.
A non-specific wind.
Yeah, which is 1 in a blue for an instant. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash and draw a card. I like this card a lot because they can't even see it like that. It's a possibility. Now, of course, you have to have 10 mana up. So if you just go, I draw my card for turn, leave my 10 mana pass, they were going to assume something's going on, but this is really hard to interact with because it can't be countered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of really sweet things that you can do with this. I think we're going to see it paired with Concordant Crossroads a lot of the time because if you're drawing 12 cards or something like that, you have a good chance to hit that 1-drop enchantment.
Or probably just have it in your hand.
Or have it in your hand, yeah. That's often how these decks will win the game with one of those big spells.
All right, the next one's interesting.
Yeah, we've been talking about this one a little bit. It's Lotho, Corrupt Shirriff. He's a white-black for a halfling rogue. He's a 2/1. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life and create a treasure token.
So this is very, 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 very similar, talking about comparisons, to Monologue Tax, which is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. And I feel like pretty much everybody, myself included, misevaluated Monologue Tax. Thought it was better than it was going to be. And we've all kind of slowly come to the point where like no one's playing Monologue Tax really anymore. And we all thought it was going to be quite good. Because it kind of looked like Smothering Tithe a little bit.
It did.
Yeah.
And everybody was looking for the next Smothering Tithe at that point.
Yeah. So here we have Lotho, which is Monologue Tax on a 2/1 for 2.
Yeah.
And yet, both of us kind of like this card.
I like Lotho. I do.
Exactly.
It's weird. It's like unclear if we're falling for the exact same monologue tax trap.
It's possible.
It's totally possible.
But I do like it. Yeah.
I do like him, and I've already put him in a deck, and I'm curious to see how he goes. There's a couple of big upsides to Lotho. He's 2 mana.
I think that's a huge one, yeah.
Huge one. So 2 versus 3, we know that the difference between those with mana rocks is enormous. So getting mana producers down on 2 is huge. And it also includes you.
Another really huge one, yeah. For monologue tax, it's only when an opponent casts their second spell. For Lotho, if you cast a second spell, you will get a treasure off of it, which I do think is a huge deal.
Right.
And those things combine to, like, if the floor is kind of a 2 mana rock, this thing costs 2 mana, it gives me 1 treasure every turn, then we know that's playable. Whereas if monologue tax is that, it's not, right? We don't play 3 mana rocks for that much, and unless they have additional upside, which monologue tax does technically, but too easy for people to dodge. And there's only 3 players, so if even, you know, if only one of them casts 2 spells, you only got 1 treasure, which is not paying you off for your investment.
Yeah.
Whereas Lotho pays you off for just 1 treasure, and then it's you, so you still have the same amount. So if you got 2 treasure per round, it's quite good for 2 mana.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 treasure per round for monologue tax is closer to Worn Power Stone, which is still not a card we really play.
Right.
So think of how good monologue tax had to be good, whereas this, even at its, I'm going to call it floor, even though technically you can't always cast 2 spells in a turn. Even at 1 per turn, we could live with it. We play signets.
Right. I think an important thing to note is monologue tax is always play it and pass and hope. Lotho is I can make a treasure now. So it's this and then, you know, some little spell. Hopefully you get that treasure back, like you were saying. Not guaranteed, but you are in this moment where you're in control of your own destiny. An interesting downside is whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life.
Oh, true.
You do. It's not you may lose a life and make a treasure. It's you are going to lose life to this thing. Does that make that big of a difference overall? Probably not. You're losing 4 life a turn to make up to 4 treasures.
Yeah, it technically can be more, right? Like Jimmy could have 2 instants in turn.
That's
choose. True. So there's maybe some weird scenarios, corner case, where you're at really low life and they could kind of scheme to get you. But like 1 life for a treasure is a very good rate. And the fact that it is difficult to do, like they can't cast their 3rd and 4th spell and do 1 damage to you again. Mm-hmm. So like your second spell is only going to happen for each player once per turn. It's just difficult for them to really do 7 or 8 out of nowhere. Once you get down below 5, this card gets a little bit careful. Scary. Yeah, but I mean, you know, you're late in the game. Hopefully the treasure advantage you've built up to that point. But maybe if you draw Lotho late and you're at 5, maybe you don't play it. That is a consideration, yeah.
For sure. It's not going to get you out of a puzzle, but I will say I slammed this into my Dihada deck. He's a white-black legend. He comes down on 2. He makes treasures, which Dihada already wants to do. I think it's going to be really, really strong in that deck. And it's going to show up in other decks that care about treasures as well. Tivid, Seller of Secrets, even like at the Yan Yansen, the Mardu sack treasures guy. I think those decks are going to be like, it's a guy that repeatedly makes artifacts. Great, he's in. And like obviously decks that care about legendaries, I really like it in Thalis, Reverent Mantra, which is like if you've made a token this turn, you make a spirit. Hypothetically, you can make a token every turn. There are places where it's really, really happy.
Academy Manufacturer.
Yeah, of course.
Has to be mentioned. If Academy Manufacturer is in your deck, then that's a pretty good signpost to me that this probably belongs in there.
Yeah. If you care about legendaries, you care about artifact creatures, I think try Lotho. Let's see what happens. Let's all fall for the trap. I
think Lotho might be kind of ubiquitous in a year or so.
I think it's really quite good.
Again, it's in 2 colors, so it can only be so ubiquitous, right? Yeah. Because just how many decks even have those 2 colors in them?
Yeah, I never play Warzone.
Yeah, exactly. It would have to be with another color. It's Abzan or something, right? Yeah. So yeah, it could only go in like, I have 25 decks. I bet it can only go in 3 of them legally. So, you know, that's the other thing that'll keep it under wraps.
Yeah, I think better than monologue tax.
I think it's a lot better. I actually think it's going to be quite good.
I agree.
It's definitely going to be quite good with our next card.
It sure is. Speaking of Academy Manufacturer.
Yeah, this next card is in the running for one of the most powerful cards in the set.
And it's a common.
Yeah, maybe number 2 or 3. It's definitely not number 1, which we'll talk about later. It's Mirkwood Bats. A lot of hullabaloo around this one. 3 and a black for a 2/3 flying bat. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. Create or sacrifice.
Create or, so specifically create and specifically sacrifice. If you lose a token, like if it just dies, nothing.
Right.
I wanted to make a point, which I always mention with this kind of thing, is creating is different than becoming a token. So if you have something like Volo that says when you cast something and you create a copy of the spell, it becomes a token. It doesn't create. It doesn't work with Mirkwood Bats.
The stuff that doesn't work with Parallel Lives.
Same stuff, yeah.
Also doesn't work with Mirkwood Bats.
I'm trying to hammer this point home.
It's confusing me to this day, so don't worry. Yeah.
Okay, so...
What are the comps? What are the comparables?
Oh, God. I mean, it's like Zulaport Cutthroat plus Nadir's Nightblade, and also you staple a Blood Art. It's a lot. We play all these cards.
Mayhem Devil. Stapled onto there, yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of so many things, but two of those things in one, because you get it when it's coming and it's going. I think the closest comparison is Nadir's Nightblade, which just cares about tokens in general.
It's incredible when you think about just a treasure token, right? Like you create it, you deal damage to everybody, you sack it to make a mana, you deal damage to everybody. So just a treasure is worth 2 damage in addition to the fact that treasures are already awesome.
Yeah.
You know, that right there. And we make lots of treasures.
Yeah.
And we, you know, obviously we can't go through without talking about Dockside and stuff, things like that. But even just like what was the Horde Dragon, the Horde Cavern Dragon?
Oh, yeah, Cavern-Hoard Dragon. You make 4. That's 4 each. Everybody loses 4. You sack them all. Everybody loses 4. Yeah.
Somebody got hit for 6. Like, it just adds up so quickly. It's Perforos, but for tokens. Like, it's...
Yeah. And for all kinds of tokens.
Yeah.
Like,
for non-creature tokens.
Like, obviously, it goes in treasure decks. It goes in, like, in clue decks. It goes in anything that just makes stuff.
All these tokens have a sack clause on them, right? Like, food, blood... clues,
Eldrazi
treasure.
Spawns.
Yeah, they sack themselves. Oh yeah, Eldrazi spawns. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it just feels like it is 4 mana, which I like that it's at the 4 mana slot. It's a very crowded slot. It feels worth it, but it doesn't feel completely broken because of that. The card we're going to talk about later is 2 mana, and that we think is the most powerful, and I think that's the mistake of it is the mana cost. But this is still pushing it for 4 mana. Like, this is still very powerful. I
think we automatically look at these 2 mana comparisons and like maybe Mayhem Devils and that kind of thing. I think this card is going to read much closer to Conrad, like Sir Conrad, because it gives you multiple instances of damage. It's like when you mill creatures, you do damage, or when things die, you do damage, or like when they leave your graveyard, they do damage. There's just a lot of ways that you could trigger Mirkwood Bats. And there's a lot of ways that you could trigger Sir Conrad, and he's a little bit higher on the end on the cost scale.
And you have to think about, especially when playing against Mirkwood Bats and Sir Conrad, I think about the same way, and I think not enough players think of it this way. Listen, if your opponent has deployed this card, they have a plan for next turn probably to kill everybody.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't have played it.
Brass Bounty.
No one's just playing out Mirkwood Bats without a plan for what they're going to do with it. With just like, I'm just going to play normally, and just along the way, we'll probably do 6 or 8 damage. No, they're like, I've had this in my hand for a while. I set everything up to the point where I'm playing this, and if you don't answer it next turn, A, B, and C is going to happen, and either everybody's dead or it's really bad, right? So yeah, this is that type of card, I think. At 2 mana, you can do the deploy early and just see what happens a little bit more, but 2 mana, you can also do it the same turn you play the Brass's Bounty, which is what sucks. Yeah. But this is 4, so I think, think about it that way. But it is going to kill you a lot of times. Like, how many times have you died to Perforos? I've died to it a lot. This is what that's going to do. Yeah.
This is Perforos. This is as much damage as Perforos. Yeah. Except for it's on a common. Also, it flies.
Well, the common part I like, because if you're going to make a card,
tons of them this weekend. I'm so glad.
If you're going to make a card that is we're going to see this much. I don't want it to be expensive for people.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's one of the best things about the card is that it's a common. I do want to do a shout out before we move on. There's only 2 cards.
I think there's only 2.
2.5 cards that say when you create a token. And that is a very, very powerful and very open-ended clause. And it's Mirkwood Bats and it's Rosie Cotton of South Lane. And I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about Rosie, but Rosie's
still pretty good.
Very good.
Yeah. Especially
in decks that make creature tokens, of course. So I want to do a shout out to Rosie. She's also very good. She's just not as scary as Mirkwood Bats.
Hey, Academy Manufacturer.
Yeah, that's the half. Yeah. It says when you would create this kind of token. All right. That's Mirkwood Bats. We're going to see a lot of it.
All right, next one is an equipment.
It is. It's Mithril Coat. It's a 3 mana equipment with flash and indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Equipped creature has indestructible. Equip 3. Okay.
So it's Darksteel played at flash speed.
That equips for free.
That equips for free the first time.
To your commander or a legendary creature the first time. Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, Darksteel Plate is crying in a corner. I think it's fully pushed off.
Is it just strictly better? Like
I think it's just...
I guess it technically equips for one more.
It equips for one more.
So it's not strictly better.
It's not as good if you're trying to protect a non-legendary, but we're a commander, so it's probably a legendary. You can get somebody's removal spell with it. Yeah,
the flash is big because that allows you to sort of get a card advantage out of it, surprise them when they thought your thing was going to be dead. Yeah.
Also, the kind of decks where the Mithril Coat is better than Heroic Intervention or Flawless Maneuver or other indestructible protection is the kind of deck that don't really care about equip costs because they got other plans for that.
Yeah, good point. How good is it still, though? Because I don't play a lot of Darksteel Plate myself.
I don't like Darksteel Plate. I don't like it at all, honestly. It feels very clunky, and if I spend, what is it? It's like 3 mana to cast, 2 mana to equip.
It's 5 mana.
Mithril Coat is just 3 mana to protect one guy. I want it to protect against everything. And this doesn't. It doesn't protect against Swords to Plowshares. It doesn't protect against Path to Exile or bounce spells. All the black
Deluge.
Like Baleful Mastery.
Yep.
Their Toxic Deluge. Yeah, it just doesn't solve everything.
It doesn't protect against bounce. I mean, players are building decks, adding removal, thinking about indestructible as a thing, like that they will have to worry about. They're not just putting destroy in. That's not that there's no destroy running around, but definitely it's not favored. Like everybody knows, like I'd rather exile if I can. I'd rather, whatever. I prefer bounce to destroy just for that reason. Mm-hmm. It just gets around. And destroy, often you don't want to send things to the graveyard because they have more usefulness in the graveyard than in their hand sometimes. So yeah. So how does this compare to protection cards that we do play, like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, I'd say, are maybe even better comps because those are the protection cards we're running for our commanders and other things. And those give a little utility with the protection. It's a different kind of protection.
The haste is what brings these. Like if this is indestructible in haste, that's a slightly different conversation. But I do not think that Mithril Coat compares to Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves in terms of just protection from spot removal for your commander. Because it doesn't cover it.
It won't surprise them.
It's more expensive, and so if you're like my commander keeps getting removed, I want to use Mithril Coat to protect it from removal. I don't think that's the correct answer. But if your commander is a little bit more innocuous or it's kind of expensive and it just keeps dying in board wipes, that's where Mithril Coat, I think, is going to really shine more because we're still running a lot of like Blasphemous X and Damnations and all of the Destroy is much more common on a board wipe than it is in targeted removal these days.
Yeah, because Mithril Coat, unless you deploy it in response to the removal, the removal can still get you because you can still be like, okay, I cast this, it goes to equip to that, and they're like, in response to that equip, kill the thing. Right. And you're like, because now I got to cast the thing and pay the 3 mana to equip it because it's already on the battlefield.
Right.
So it really is like a defensive, save my creature thing, and holding 3 mana up for that, it can be tough. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really love the card myself.
It's interesting. It would be sweet in your Heliod deck because it's colorless and you can cast it at flash speed and your commander is scary,
and the fact that
it's free there.
Yeah, and the fact that I have a lot of options of things to cast at flash speed is what kind of gets it, maybe to playable. Because if you only have 2 or 3 things in your deck or in your hand at any time that can be cast at flash speed, then if you don't do them, you've wasted that mana. What you want is like, okay, I have Mithril Coat, I've got some sort of flash or instant speed draw spell, and now maybe I've got a counter spell. And now, if something scary happens that I need to stop, I'll counter it. If they go to remove my commander, I'll save it. If none of that happens, I'll draw cards. But if your only option is I have this, and if nobody tries to remove it, what do I do? Do I cast it just so I don't waste the mana? But then I'm opening myself up to that scenario where they remove it in response to the equipment. That sucks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, instant really compounds on itself. You really need a lot of instant speed stuff.
Something that I'm just thinking about right now too is an equipment, so it's going to go in a lot of like Boros decks are the ones that care about equipment specifically, and Boros decks lean some on card draw. White's gotten some card draw, but there's a lot of impulse draw, which is really bad with flash stuff. Yeah, it's very hard to surprise somebody with impulse draw.
They can see it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think it's going to find fewer homes than we thought. I played it in limited. It wasn't great in limited.
That's interesting. I thought it would be decent.
Yeah, you would think, and there was a lot of bounce spells in limited. Anyway, we are going to talk about the most powerful card in this set.
Wait, it's a question. The
What?
most powerful new card in the set? Question mark? It is.
It is.
Spoiler alert, it is.
It's not a question.
And it's coming up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it next, right after a few words from our sponsors.
Hey everyone, we are super excited to announce that we are now sponsored by ARCHIDEKT.
ARCHIDEKT is the perfect place to build and store decks online, whether you want to build from scratch or catalog your collection.
Everything is easy and intuitive. It's got the same feeling as when you sit at the table with your cards laid out right in front of you.
Then, once your deck is done and ready to go, their built-in playtester is a great tool to make sure your brews work as intended.
And now that ARCHIDEKT has partnered with EDH Rec, they have all the resources and data they need to really refine and perfect the platform. So even if you've tried ARCHIDEKT in the past, it's definitely worth taking a new look right now.
Just go to archidekt.com and start brewing on the best deck builder out there.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com.
Citizens of Dominaria, I am Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. Prepare to be liberated from hunger. Factor is here to free you with delicious, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals require a mere 2 minutes to prepare, leaving you liberated to enjoy the summer. Annoying trips to the grocery store? Liberated. Long cook times and cleanup? Liberated. Overpriced takeout and delivery? Liberated. They offer over 34 different delectable choices each week with options like keto and calorie smart to optimize your fuel intake. My favorite is the barbecue pork Sloppy Joe. It gives me the energy I need to liberate. In fact, liberating you has drained my energy. Preparing to receive Sloppy Joe. Yum. Yum. Delicious. Yum.
Head to factormeals.com/command50 and use code command50 to get 50% off your first box. That's code command50 at factormeals.com/command50 to get 50% off your first box.
So Jimmy, what's a game where no one wins?
A Stacks mirror match?
That's close, but no, I was looking for the waiting game.
What?
Well, when you're hiring, waiting for great talent to find you, that is just not a winning strategy. So find them first with Indeed, the platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Why waste hours browsing multiple job sites when Indeed has powerful tools like Instant Match, which tutors for ideal candidates the moment you sponsor a post? Indeed's hiring platform just makes the whole process easy, helping you hire faster while only charging for applications that actually match your requirements.
So with Indeed, everyone wins.
Exactly, just like a Stacks mirror match.
Oh,
What? Stacks is fun.
I know for a fact you don't believe that.
Or do I? Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/CommandZone. Offer good for a limited time.
Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/CommandZone. Just go to Indeed.com/CommandZone and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast.
Again, that's Indeed.com/CommandZone. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, we are back. We are talking about the cards that go in the 99 from the new Lord of the Rings, the Battle for Middle-earth. Battle? No, Tales of Middle-earth.
Tales of Middle-earth.
Yeah, I
they're
got
just telling the story. There's
There
a couple.
were
different
battles,
Yeah.
but yeah, then it's not
That's
about
just
the battles.
part of the story.
Man, somebody branding a wizard is rolling over in their grave. Okay.
Oh, God.
All right, so we teased it before the break, and now we're going to talk about hands down the most powerful card, singular card in the entire set for Commander. Probably for all formats.
For all formats. It's a problem
legal.
for Legacy. It's like people are looking at it in Modern. It's Orcish Bowmasters.
This card's insane.
1 and a black for an Orc Archer. They're great at it. It has flash. It's a 1/1, and it says when it enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, then amass 1. Okay.
Oh, it's so much stuff for 2 mana.
It's so there's so much going on here. I've seen a lot of discussions about Orcish Bowmaster talking about like what if you Orcish Bowmaster and wheel, which we'll talk about in a second. But let's just
It's the
talk
first thing everybody talks about, yeah.
Yeah, let's just talk about Orcish Bowmaster without the clause, the draw clause. Like it's a 2 mana, 2 body, 1 damage, flash.
Yeah, because it ETBs,
spell.
which is easy to miss. So even
Yeah.
if nothing happens, you just play it. You will do 1 damage to something and make another 1/1 for 2 mana. So you get 2 bodies and you've dealt 1 damage to something.
That's great.
I mean, that is for 2 mana with flash.
With flash, whenever.
Yeah. That already is like, how do you get all of that?
You can kill an Esper Sentinel without triggering the Esper Sentinel.
And then we've left out the most powerful part about
Right.
the whole card by far. So
And it's still the best like 2 mana, 2 body spell ever printed.
It's up there for sure. It's pretty crazy as a card. So yeah, let's talk about the wheeling because it's the first thing everybody thinks about.
This is the first thing everybody thinks about it. So it's just what happens if there's somebody casts a Wheel of Fortune and you cast an Orcish Bowmasters in response.
Well, you're going to get 21 triggers. 22 because you're going to get the Orcish Bowmaster trigger. Yep. So you're going to deal 22 damage as you choose, divided among any targets, right? Because each one of those triggers will be singular. So one there, one there, one there, one back to this first one, whatever you want to do. Just spread it around.
14 to your face.
Any target. Why it's any target, why it's not opponent, why it's not creatures only, why they didn't limit that. That is crazy, but I don't know. And then, because that's not enough, you'll be like, cool, then I'm going to amass orcs 22 times, so I'm going to get a 22/22 at the end of this. But not even that. I'm going to amass orcs 22 times, which is different than amass orcs 22.
Yeah.
So you will have time in there to even take advantage of the fact it could be that 22 separate creatures enter the battlefield under your control, depending on, you got sack outlets and things like that. So yeah, the potential upside of what you'll be able to do is insane and that's off of a wheel, obviously.
Yeah. You could just straight up kill somebody with a Peer into the Abyss. Like if they cast a Peer into the Abyss targeting themselves, you're like, cool, die.
I mean, a Wheel of Fortune that's turn 7 or 8, it could easily be just like that amount of damage kills somebody, right?
Yeah,
like
21 damage.
Even 2 people.
22 damage?
Yeah, or just removes the one blocker and kills someone else, and now you can attack with the 22/22 on your turn. Yeah, just what you get right there without all the other shenanigans is crazy. But of course, there's other shenanigans you can do. Let's talk about comparisons because
it's hard to pick exactly what to compare it to because there's so much going on. You're like, do we compare it to the 2 mana instant that makes 2 1/1s? Do we compare it to Shieldred the Apocalypse that punishes you for drawing? Do we
Cataract Parasite, Underworld Dream's classically kind of the first card that did that. But that's only damage to opponents. You can't throw that stuff around as removal at creatures.
So you're like, okay, is it kind of like Mayhem Devil? And you're like, it's also like Mayhem Devil.
Yeah, except for Mayhem Devil, you need another piece to do what it does. Yeah. It's like Mayhem Devil if Mayhem Devil said whenever you create a token, deal the 1 damage to any target.
With flash.
Yeah.
Whenever an opponent makes a token.
And it costs 2 mana and also did other things.
Yeah.
It's nothing like Mayhem Devil. It's way better.
It's so much better than Mayhem Devil. And Mayhem Devil's great. Like, it's like perplexingly good.
Yeah, you almost kind of wonder how the design came about. Like, how is this possible? It feels like, it does feel like a mistake. I mean, it has... Yeah, let's listen. Yeah. It's going to be hard to talk about. Wheel's obviously good.
Yes.
If you can make your opponents draw cards, it's going to be really, really good. You can do interesting things that I alluded to earlier with sacrificing the amass tokens, though. Yeah. So let's say you have a sacrifice outlet, Ashnod's Altar or something that's free. Then if you've got 22 amass 1 triggers on the stack, you can sack it each time in between each trigger. So you can be like, cool, it makes a 1/1.
Sack the 1/1 before the next trigger resolves.
Amass 1 again, makes a 1/1, sack it. And so if you got Blood Artist, you don't even need Blood Artist. What if you got Perforos? What if you got Impact Tremors?
Yeah.
What if you got both?
What do you got? Mayhem Devil.
Yeah. What if you got Mayhem Devil?
The grossest one is Goblin Bombardment because it's just a sack outlet with damage. So if there's like, if you have a Goblin Bombardment on the board and somebody else casts a wheel,
you're going to throw 44 damage around.
You'll throw 44 damage because you can sack each instance of amass, deal 1 damage, plus it deals the 1 damage from the Orcish Bowmasters.
And the thing is, all of that costs 2 mana for Goblin Bombardment, 2 mana for Orcish Bowmasters, and then 3 mana for a wheel. So it's very doable very early in the game. That you could do this as early as turn 6.
And those are all great played cards in tons of decks.
Yeah, you're not morphing your deck in any way or to squeeze this or twisting your deck in some weird direction in order to make this work. It's not call for aid like we were talking about earlier. This is like just take decks that already exist with really good cards in them and put this in, and all of a sudden you open up all these possibilities. Yeah.
So you can do that with Blood Artist or Goblin Bombardment. So it's great in Aristocrat decks in addition to wheel decks. It's great in Pinger decks like the new Obnixilis Captive Kingpin that impulse draws whenever you deal an opponent loses 1 life.
Yep.
It's great in your Torwaki build.
That's the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh damn, it's gonna be so good in there.
Yeah, if you do 1 damage, you do 2 damage instead. It's like
that deck already has Grafted Exoskeleton too, which if you put on the Bowmasters is ridiculous.
It's the fact that it's damage and is instead of loss of life means you can give it lifelink, means you can give it death touch, means you can give it infect. Like this is
loss of life would have been better.
Would have been so much better because then you can't
also
clean up somebody's board.
Wouldn't hit creatures,
And like on just at its floor, like you could just have a chillin' Orcish Bowmasters that like whenever your opponents kind of draw, sometimes you just make a 1/1 that can block forever. Like it's just also kind of an Ophiomancer.
I mean, your opponents draw a second card on their turn most turns of the game, I would say.
Yeah.
Like after like the setup turns, right? So from 4 on, in order to stay in games, you better be drawn either 6 at a time or 1 or 2 extra every turn. That is just how it goes. So you're going to amass and deal a damage at least like twice around the table, right? Like that's just going to happen.
Yeah.
You don't have to have wheels and you don't have to be an aristocrats. And that is a question I had for you, which is this just good in any deck that has black in it? Do you need synergy to make this good? Or is this like Dauthi Voidwalker good? Is this Dockside good? I mean, I'm not talking about power level because I think Dockside is more powerful, but I do think this is probably more powerful than Dauthi Voidwalker though. But, you know, just in the way that like ubiquitousness, like you don't need anything else going on. Smothering Tithe, right? You just play that card. Sure, with wheels it's better, but if you have no wheels in your deck, Smothering Tithe is still gonna be awesome. Do you think this falls into that category? Or do you think you need some of this other stuff in order to make it good?
I think the fact that it's so good with so many things that we're doing already means that it just does.
You can just count on your opponents doing some amount of that.
It's 2 mana. So it's not like it's not at fighting for the 4-drop slot like Mirkwood Bats.
It's a low opportunity cost.
Yeah. The fact that like you could just cast this thing, non-response to anything, kill an Esper Sentinel and have 2 bodies.
Oh yeah, it just picks off Esper Sentinels and Mana Dorks and Deathrite Shamans and whatever
it taps a Mother of Runes.
Why doesn't it just trigger on the second card people have drawn or something like that? Why isn't it more like Lotho or something? I mean, we could ask a lot of whys, and we have been.
That's the thing. Is like
why is it not 4 mana?
Yeah, why isn't it 4 mana? Make Mirkwood Bats 2 mana. Like,
why does it have flash?
Why does it have both an ETB and whenever an opponent draws?
Honestly, why does it even amass?
Why does it amass? What if it just didn't make a 21/21?
Yeah, it would still be amazing.
It would still be great.
Yeah.
It's like we could do an entire episode on what is going on with this card and we wouldn't have answers at the end of it. I think this card is straight up a misunderstanding of how people play Commander today. Because it's also outrageous in Legacy and in Modern.
Yeah, I think it was just a mistake. I would be interested to know the process of design and if there was like a late minute change or like, they're split up into like design and templating and other things. And if somebody just didn't understand when they made the change, kind of Skull Clamp is famously that card where they tried to depower it and accidentally powered it up. And this feels like, I don't know what the depowering was, but it feels like wires got crossed somewhere in there. Maybe it shouldn't have said any target or some change didn't make it through, but that's what it feels like to me. I'm getting from this that you don't like the card.
I will go on the record and say that I'm mad about this card.
There's on the record, in case you're going to tell. Usually I'm the one with a lot of umbrage.
There's a lot of cards. Like, there's not a ton of cards that when they were printed, I'm like, I hate this card.
Right. I don't know why I get so much joy out of it.
Dockside's close. I hate Jodah the Unifier. I think that's a terrible card design. And this one's on the list now because it's not like Dauthi is awesome and goes in every black deck and it will be good in that black deck. But people look at Dauthi and are like, oh, Dauthi is like feel bads and that kind of thing. This is not. This is obviously there are moments where it feels too good, like it'll feel Dockside too good, but it's not doing feel bad things. It's not doing Hull Breacher things. It's just great.
Right, it doesn't stop them exactly.
Right, it doesn't stop them. It just kills people. So it like cards like this, it's hard to justify a ban for them because it's just good. And it's like, is it better than Sol Ring? No.
It's just too efficient. Yeah.
It's just too good. It's just designed badly, and that's in a set that I think is great. And is designed amazingly. This card stands out as like, what happened?
I don't think this is a design flaw. I think this is a balancing flaw.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't think this is designed badly. You can have a card conceivably that does all the things this card is doing, but the problem is just like you didn't turn the knobs correctly. It needs to cost more mana.
Or like somebody bumped into a knob.
Yeah. And I would give them the benefit of the doubt. And I have no idea because we're not on the inside of any of this.
Right,
but like maybe there was a miscommunication. This seems like a clear case where that could have happened, but who knows? Just because just so egregious. But yeah, just make it a 2/3 and it costs 4 mana, and something like that. Those knobs could be turned to the point where like this is fine.
Right.
But because it got turned all the way up to 11, and now it is a 1/1 that costs 2 with a million abilities.
Yeah.
Like, you used to be able to...
This is like Oko. It reminds me of Oko, where when Oko came out, we were like, it does what?
Yeah. Why doesn't it cost 5? Because if it costs 5, all of a sudden it's a different conversation.
Right. Yeah.
So the mana cost is... It's like Lotho and Monologue Tax, right? The 1 mana mattered a lot to our evaluation of that card. Suddenly we go from like, we don't like it to we like it, and it's going to be quite good. And so now we've got a thing that's maybe 2 mana off axis from what it should be, maybe even 3.
Yeah.
And that's a big, huge divide, because the difference between, I will put this in my deck and not is often a mana or 2 cost. So, yeah. I don't like the card either, as far as like, I don't like the fact that it exists, but I like the card from a stance of like, it is powerful.
It's cool.
So
it's better than Hull Breacher.
It's definitely not,
because I'd
bad.
rather be dead than have no hand.
Yeah. The card I famously dislike like that is Jeweled Lotus. That very much hate and think it just causes bad games in general. And I don't know yet that this will cause bad games. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say I did not see many open this weekend, and it makes me nervous.
It's a rare?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there'll be plenty of them.
I hope so.
This set is going to be open.
They're going to open a lot of them. Yeah.
This set will be open more than any set ever, and there'll be a bunch of cards that Lord of the Rings fans who don't play Magic are just like turning into LGSs because they wanted Gimli and Aragorn. They didn't want Orcish Bowmasters. So I think though this should be cheap.
Hopefully.
I hope.
I hope so.
Okay.
This next one's cool, though. I love it. I could do a whole episode about what is going on with
This is cool.
Okay, but I'm excited about this next one.
It's the Palantir of Orthanc. It's 3 mana for a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on Palantir of Orthanc and scry 2. Then target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X cards, where X is the number of influence counters on Palantir of Orthanc, and that player loses life equal to the total mana value of the card of those cards. The cards milled. So, yeah, it's interesting. The Palantirs famously sort of let you see across large distances and sort of into the future. That's the scry part of it.
But it can, like, it does hurt the people that look into it. It corrupts
them slowly over time. Yep.
So it can, like, slowly erode at your library, but it also hurts the people around you.
Right?
Yeah,
the library is the mind. So the flavor of it's very cool.
I also think it's like pretty good. Like it sort of rhymes with something like a combustible Gear Hulk effect, which is like, do I draw the card or are you going to risk it for the biscuit?
Right.
We've seen a couple of draw things like that, but typically they're in black or they're in red or they're in these sort of chaotic things. This is colorless.
Yeah, that's nice. And there are color combinations and things that want the mill. That have a little bit harder time getting it than like the Dimir decks do, so that's nice as well.
Like it's a decent card draw thing. Like it's 3 mana and you scry 2 and draw a card maybe, or you drain your opponents for a little bit and mill a little bit. So those are both pretty good things in Commander overall, and you do it at end step, so it's not the Phyrexian Arena where you cast it and have to wait. But the fact that it's colorless and that it has this fairly sizable mill ability means it goes in decks like my Ratchet Field Medic deck, which is a graveyard artifact deck in mono white.
Yeah, white has a hard time milling itself.
You can't mill at all in white.
You get a little artifact stuff, but yeah.
Like you can do the one whenever you untap, you
Mesmeric Orb?
Mesmeric Orb. But people don't tend to leave Mesmeric Orb alone because they're tired of you milling them.
Yeah, because it mills them too, yeah.
Yeah, so this one gives you like a value mill piece that also gives you a little bit of card draw and could drain your opponents. So I think this card is really cool and is going to be like the decks that really want it are excited to see it.
Yeah, I think you have to want both sides of the card. Now, wanting card draw is easy, but if you don't want cards in your graveyard, then this card's not playable in your deck because...
Yeah, or you benefit from them losing life.
Yeah, but even then, I think it's too low because you'd have to have a high enough CMC deck that you can like deal enough damage that would be worth it. Because I don't like giving my opponents the choice when I only want one choice.
Right.
Because they are pretty smart, my opponents, and a lot of times they're going to give me the choice that I don't want. So I want to want both things. Even if I want one a little more than the other, still either outcome is fine. And that means that I need to be playing around in my graveyard in order to really want this. Because if they go mill, I'm like, cool, I'll use those. And if they go draw, cool, I'll use that. But I don't want it to be like, Mill. Okay, I did a little damage, but because I don't play Lava Axes really, like I want to play cards that are going to like, you know, help me continue to gas up and be ready to like, you know, have ammunition to throw at them later. So yeah, I think it's quite a good card though if you do want the mill, because it's going to deal damage also. It puts them in a real conundrum, and I think if you evaluate it on that axis of like, eventually for any deck that's playing this, they have to just give you the card every time, because it's way worse than mill. Because if you're using your graveyard, they're kind of giving you multiple cards, whereas it's much better to just give you the one card. Yeah. And they're risking a bunch of damage too. So
you
it's
mill
like
4 cards. I don't want to lose 8 life right now.
Once it gets to 4, I don't think.
Yeah, and 4's a low average.
I don't think they can do anything except say draw. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a 3 mana draw a card every turn. It's Phyrexian Arena.
Scry 2 draw.
Yeah, and Scry 2 draw is a lot better than Phyrexian Arena. So if you think about it in those terms, but the one thing I'll say is it's bad in the same place as Phyrexian Arena is bad, which is when you draw it on turn 7 or 8.
Yep.
And so you always got to consider that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that you put in here, which is interesting, is like, do you put this in a proliferate deck, like a deck that wants to make it better and better? That was my only thing I
could think of where I'm like, if I'm not playing with my graveyard, is there a deck that wants it? And I'm like, maybe if I got a proliferate deck, because if you get this thing to 8 or 9, they can't do the mill thing. Yeah. Because it'll just be too much damage.
Right.
Yeah. So at that point, you're like, then would I play a Scry 2 draw a card every turn card? But I don't know. What do you think about that? So I could see it. If I don't want stuff in the graveyard, I could see it in a dedicated high CMC deck. Like we built that Boros Exile card, Belborka. Excuse me. Oh yeah, Belborka had a lot of high CMC, purposefully high CMC spells in it because Belborka cared about the mana value of what it exiled. So if you're playing a deck where you're like, the average mana value in this deck is high, and it's like, if I can, you don't really want to drain somebody for like 5, but if you're like, the odds are good that if I mill a couple cards, they will lose 8 or more life, then I can see putting it into that kind of deck, like a colorless Eldrazi deck or something. This is going to be great. If you're proliferating a lot where you're like, it's just going to be a draw every turn. Yeah. Scry 2 draw every turn is quite good. Yeah, it's get the best card out of your top 3 kind of.
Right.
Yeah, and Scry 2, we would say that's maybe like 2/3 of a card, so it's almost draw 2.
Or in like an artifact deck that cares about casting artifacts. Like I could see putting this into something like a Chiskoria deck, which cares about the number of artifacts you can. If you can do that effect on an artifact, then you do it on an artifact. There are a lot of things to build around here.
All right, pretty cool. What do we got up next?
Oh, it's Pippin.
Pippin.
It's Pippin, God of the Citadel.
Pippin in Gondor.
White and a blue for a halfling soldier. He's a 2/2 with vigilance and ward 1. It says tap. Another target creature you control gains protection from the card type of your choice until end of turn.
It's Pippin of Runes.
It's a Pippin of Runes. Yeah, the most obvious comparison here is Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes. Probably more specifically Giver of Runes.
Yeah, because it says another.
Because it says another. It cannot protect itself, and it can protect you from colorless. It protects you from more things than Mother of Runes does.
Yeah, it's interesting. The protection from a type of card means that colorless cards can be protected from, whereas Mother of Runes, not a lot of ways to reach out and deal with creatures colorlessly, but attacking blocking kind of matters. And you made a good point, which I hadn't really thought about too much, which is it has better evasion than either Mother or Giver of Runes. Because if I have a multicolor deck and I have some green creatures and some black creatures, well, Mother of Runes can't make my whole board unblockable. I have to have all of one color. But this can just say protection from creatures. Well, creatures can't block. And those are the only things that can block. Spoiler alert. So,
those are the blocking ones.
So, yeah, you're going to get through. So that part of it's actually pretty interesting as just an unblockable giver eventually.
Right. I really like this card in a deck that's like white blue combat damage matters type of deck. And it's because it's good in the meantime, it is good protection, and it is like you just can't leave it on the battlefield.
Protect your commander, just kind of sits there, and then eventually maybe you use it to like sneak in some damage or something. I was thinking about it even for like Shurikai, even though it doesn't protect Shurikai exactly, but it does. There's usually some turns later in the game where you're like, cool, crew it up, hit you for 8.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm going to get there at the end when I've attritioned you out. So
I like this one a lot. What I like about Pippin too is he can be good later. Like the protection thing does save you from auras and curses and that kind of thing. Not curses because those go on the player, I guess. But if somebody like puts a Darksteel mutation or something on a creature, you can pop it off.
Yep.
So it does give you that protection thing that Mother and Giver do in addition to this unblockable clause. The question is, do you run Pippin over Mother and Giver of Runes in your decks?
It's a really tough question. Not over Mother. Because Mother protects itself, which gives you the ability to play it early and just kind of put it out there.
It's always safe,
Yeah.
For most things.
Maybe over Giver.
I think over Giver. I can't think of a deck where you want 3 of these.
Right.
So I think I would run 2. Obviously, it's white-blue, so it has to be in a white-blue deck. But I like Pippin over Giver because of that utility and that Ward 1 is big.
Yeah. It does protect itself a little bit with the ward, has vigilance, it can get in a little damage early, you know. If you have some other sort of synergies with attacking with 2 creatures or something, say, it gets a little bit better. Yeah. It's just enough that I do think it's worth that 1 extra mana. And I agree. I think I would play it over Giver. But it depends. You know, there's probably some synergies that would push me the other way in a specific deck.
Yeah. And protection from a card type is like, I was trying to think of neat things. I thought for a second that you could target anybody's creatures. And I was like, could I pop a bunch of equipments off of somebody?
Sweet.
And it was like, that's broken. It does not do that.
That would be cool, though.
It would be so cool.
They go to attack you like, all right.
Yeah.
Protection from artifacts.
Yeah. All your swords fall off.
All right, the next one is interesting. It's called Reprieve. It's 1 and a white for an instant. Return target spell to its owner's hand, and then draw a card. So this is a pseudo counter, right? They put it on the stack. It's still a spell. It hasn't resolved yet. You return to their hand, so the effect does not happen. The obvious comparison to this is a card called Remand, which is 1 and a blue for an instant, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of into that player's graveyard and draw a card. So it does not return a spell to the hand. It does counter it. Reprieve is interesting because it would still get around the can't be countered clause. They go to cast Last March of the Ents, can't be countered, and you go, yeah, Reprieve it. Back to your hand. You got another 8 mana? No, you do not.
Next time.
Yeah.
Or not. I'll kill you now.
Other comps are kind of, you put down Narset's Reversal, Unsubstantiate, Venser, Shaper Savant. Interestingly, all 3 cards I play a lot more than I play Remand.
Yeah, because they're a little bit more flexible. Venser's powerful because you can use it over and over again. Unsubstantiate is great because you can also bounce permanents. Creatures.
Narset's Reversal just steals their spell.
Steals it.
If
and
they
that
cast Last March of the Ents and you have Narset's Reversal, they're crying.
Yeah. You didn't, but you can't counter it.
Why do you get to put creatures out? Why are you drawing?
I didn't mean to do that. Narset's so rude in every instance of card.
Yeah, Narset's one of the biggest jerks of the whole
She's like
cast.
a hero in the story, and she's such a bad guy to command her.
Yeah, she's this feel-bad central.
But it's interesting. So Reprieve is similar to these spells, which don't see a ton of play unless you're really abusing, you know, the Venser Blink thing, or Unsubstantiate, like where Bounce is better. Like I haven't played Unsubstantiate, although
I love Bounce, so I actually play it quite a bit. And
I think Unsubstantiate should see more play. I think it's quite good.
It's very good. You get people all the time because, and the thing that sucks about counters is if you draw it once the threat is already on the table, you can't. The counter spell does nothing. But Unsubstantiate is like, no, cool. I can still get. You know, I can deal with it a little. Yeah.
Yeah. It's and Bounce is. We've talked about this, but Bounce is getting better and better the faster the format speeds up. But we are comparing these Reprieve to blue counter spells, which isn't necessarily fair.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, is it fair to say, because I can say this for myself, I don't play Remand much, and this card is close to Remand.
Yeah, I never get far enough down the counter list that I get to Remand.
Right. Because
there's, you know, at least 5 counter spells that are better than it.
So the question becomes, when you take this effect and put it into white, does that significantly change the evaluation in favor of you playing it more, or is this another card we just won't play? So the other comparisons we now have to look at are the white counterspells that exist, and there are very few.
Right.
So there's Mana Tithe, which is 1 white mana, and for an instant, counter target spell unless its controller plays 1. Famously, people love to tweet at you when they Mana Tithe something, because it is a gotcha moment, right?
Yep, and it's dead most of the time, so you're excited when it's not.
Yeah, it's a really... I don't like the card myself because when you draw on turn 8 or 9, it does nothing, right? They always have the extra mana to pay.
It's also much worse with treasures running around.
Yeah.
Because you often have just like loose mana.
Yep. Now there's Rebuff the Wicked, 1 white for an instant counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. This is narrower, right? Like if they go to cast a board wipe, doesn't do anything. Teferi's Protection doesn't do anything. If they're like remove your commander, okay.
Got it. Yeah.
And then there's my favorite of the 3, which is Lapse of Certainty. This is more expensive of those. 2 and a white for an instant counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. So this is stop it for now, but you're going to get another shot at it.
In a second. So the funny thing about this is Lapse of Certainty is also my favorite out of those 3. It is sees the least play significantly. Like Mana Tithe is in 26,000 decks, which is not that many. 26,000 is very, very low of the possible decks it could be in. And Rebuff is in 24,000, so slightly less. And Lapse is in 12,600.
I think it's the same reason people misevaluate Bounce.
Right.
They just don't like the idea that they still have it. But it turns out in play, the fact that you've delayed it often works in the same way that removing it does. But that's just my evaluation of why I play it.
That's how I feel.
You get people with all these cards because it's white and they don't see it coming, right?
Right.
Like that's kind of the outcome. So you like Lapse the best.
I like Lapse the best out of those. I notably didn't put Dawn Charm in here because I don't think it's a very good counterspell. It's much too narrow. I like Mana Tithe next best because white has better protection than Rebuff.
We're in agreement.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's put Reprieve into this. We're jockeying for position. Do you put it above Lapse? Do you put it in the middle? Do you put it at the bottom? Like where do you think it fits? Is it in the playable category?
I think it's above Lapse because it's 2 mana. 3 mana is a lot. And it cantrips. Lapse does a similar thing because it sort of blanks their draw, so it takes a card away from them.
It's way better for you to draw a card, though, than it is for your opponent to not draw one.
for them to draw that same thing that you're worried about.
Also, they can sometimes draw at the same turn if they have a draw effect,
Right. So I put Reprieve above Lapse, and certainly above the other 2, which I don't play and wouldn't put in decks. The interesting thing about it is this the interaction that white wants? Like, does white want counterspells?
I find 1 Lapse of Certainty in a deck that doesn't have blue but does have white to be quite powerful because the surprise factor is so high, and you can often... They look around for a coast is clear moment to try and win the game, and you can often stop that moment because they just don't see Lapse coming.
Yeah, stack interaction.
And I think Reprieve, I kind of agree with you. I was thinking, like, I think I do replace this because it has an additional upside of cantripping, which Lapse doesn't have. And so you can just kind of be like, this is not the type of game where I need this. I'm just going to fire it off, inconvenience somebody, but replace itself. And the cost is a lot lower.
This is not necessarily Lapse's fault too, but having it in their hand, it's a lot more easier to interact with their hand than what's on top of their library when you're in white, because you're doing, like, white often goes with Wheel of Fortunes or like wheel stuff generally that can force people into getting it out of their hand. I guess you could mill them if it's on top of their library if you really want to get it gone. But I do think that, like, white wants to commit to the board, so being able to have that 2 mana up versus the 3 mana is a big difference in terms of, like...
And you often want to hold up a swords or a path, and that's often what they think you're holding up, and that's one of the reasons I find Lapse to be good, and that I think Reprieve to be good. Yeah, I would predict that of all the cards we're talking about, and if you take out, the hyper powerful ones, I'll probably play this card more than most of the other ones.
Yeah.
Because if my deck has white and doesn't have blue, then I probably want this card. I almost always want, like, I play Imp's Mischief, right? For the same reason. Because black and white, they just don't think you have stack interaction. And you can often just steal games off the back of, like, wait for their go for it moment, stop them, then you go.
Yep.
And so, I think this will absolutely do it. So it's going to, for me, low key, like, one of the, not most powerful, but
certainly
most useful new cards.
Yeah, I like Reprieve a lot. I'm curious to see how it's going to feel in hand. Like I said, I generally play at a much lower power level, so big sorceries don't often win the game. It's usually like creature interaction is more important, but I think being able to just slow down that, like, you can create a hoof next turn.
It's so much different, though, because, like, everyone knows.
Right. Because, like, swordsing a Crater Hoof doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And now everybody's like, you have a crater hoof, die! Like, you can change the entire tempo of the game because you blow somebody's surprise.
Yep.
Cool.
All right.
All right, this next one we're going to talk about, I want to talk about very quickly because I think it's interesting. It is Sail into the West. 2, a green and a blue for an instant with Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for Return or Embark. If Return gets more votes, each player returns up to 2 cards from their graveyard to their hand. Then you exile Sail into the West. If Embark gets more votes or the vote is tied, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. So I wanted to draw attention to the fact that this is an instant.
Yeah, that's interesting. So everybody regrowths twice. Is it permanents only? Nope, just 2 cards. Or everybody wheels.
Everybody wheels.
And wheels is the tiebreaker. So, yeah.
It rounds up to a wheel.
Yeah, I didn't notice that when I first read it, and you pointed it out, which is you have to convince 2 players if you want the regrowth effect. You only have to convince 1 player if you want the wheel effect.
Which most of the time, I'm like, yeah, wheel. Team wheel.
Yeah. I mean,
unless it's going to be like they're going to win the game if they wheel.
Yeah. It's the same thing as Palantir for me, especially because the graveyard is open information. So they're going to know what you want to do probably, and they're going to probably not want you to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's, once again, if you're not playing with your graveyard, you probably don't want this because you need to want things in there.
What I like about this is what I like about Wheel of Misfortune is it's the kind of wheel that doesn't force your opponents to wheel. So if they have something nasty on the board, if they have a Smothering Tithe, or there is a Smothering Tithe, or if they have an Orcish Bowmasters or something like that, you have an out. Even if the wheel gets voted for, you're like, I am not going to wheel because it's a May wheel. So it's still a wheel effect that you still get to play, which are fun effects to play without being able to abuse it and force your opponents into situations where they don't want to be. So I think it's a cool draw spell. I think I would run it probably more as a draw spell, but it isn't necessarily a wheel deck wheel. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go.
The next one, I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. This is Spiteful Banditry, red, and X for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. So if you pay, if X is equal to 2, that's 4 mana, deal 2 to all creatures. And it says, whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. And that's an enchantment, so even though it reads kind of like a sorcery, so it sticks around after it does the board wipe. It'll give you the 1 treasure if you kill at least 1 creature when you play it. And then it gives you this kind of 1 rebate right back. And then if any other of your opponent's creatures die on subsequent turns, you'll get those treasure tokens.
Yeah, this card's fascinating.
It's tough to evaluate.
I am not convinced it's good, and I am not convinced it's bad. I do not know. But I'm curious about it because it does feel like most of the time I want to cast this for fairly cheap. It is not a great rate for a board wipe. Like, you can cast a damnation for 4 mana, and this deals 2 damage to everything for 4 mana, which is not going to handle most of your problems. So this is sort of a board wipe to clear up, mana dorks and little value creatures, cataract parasites, that kind of thing. But Scute Swarms. Oh, you have to have, if your deck doesn't have an answer to Scute Swarm,
then you're gonna be sad.
You're gonna be in big trouble.
I've had this theory for a while that the sort of Anger of the Gods cards are getting better.
Yeah.
Because the format's getting faster and a lot more is happening with sort of the early creatures than used to, and people are just playing a lot more sort of low mana value, low toughness because of that. Things more Ragavans. It used to be like there's Death Rites and some mana dorks, but most of the stuff that was going to do a lot of harm to you was a little bit bigger. And now it's like there's Ragavans and Timnas and exactly. There's a lot sort of running around at the lower that you want to like clean up.
Orcish Bowmasters.
Yeah, so I think this gets a little better in that environment. But to me, it depends a lot on your deck whether you want this card because it depends on the toughness of your commander and your important cards. If they're a little bit on the higher end, this becomes better.
Right.
If they're on the lower end, this becomes worse because the advantage you have over Damnation is that I can choose some things to live,
right,
which Damnation doesn't give you the power to do. And I think you have to be like, well, do I have some things that want to live? So yeah, Meat Hook Massacre was kind of what I thought as an as a comparison to this.
A great first comparison because Meat Hook Massacre is also black X and it takes care of stuff with toughness X or lower, so it's the same rate as Meat Hook Massacre.
And it sits around and has like a Blood Artisty type
like
effect.
A thing.
Yeah.
I think Meat Hook Massacre's effect, like it's on the battlefield effect, is significantly stronger than Spiteful Banditry.
I mean, they added the only this can only trigger once each turn, probably in response to the fact that Massacre was a little too good.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's very responsible, but it's also hard to sort of take advantage of. Whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, yeah. So you really want like a creature to die each turn in order to get the most treasures out of it. But it's also been a board wipe, so it's already like easily a 4-for-1 or something like that. So I kind of like the fact
it's hard to evaluate. It really is.
Like if you pick off like an Esper Sentinel and a couple mana dorks, which is an easy and you spend 4 mana on it, then you make the one back. You get the 1 treasure back.
So you effectively spent 3
mana to get rid of those things, and then it just sort of chills. And every so often you get like a treasure or 2, like when they crack Sakura Tribe Elders and that kind of thing.
Yeah, how many treasures from that point to the end of the game do you have to get before you're pretty happy with it? It's not that many, right?
I don't think it's that many. I think it's like 3, because then you've gotten the value out of the board wipe, and you've paid most of your mana back in turns where you need it more.
Yeah, and there's some power to being able to save up mana over turns. Like, that's the thing I think we've sort of didn't properly evaluate early about treasures, but it is very powerful to just take my mana now and save it till later and combine it with what I've got at that point too. So you get a little bit of that.
It's an easy thing to forget about.
Yeah.
I looked at like other things that do something similar, like Gadrick the Crown Scourge, which says at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure for each non-token creature that died this turn. So it's better if like you can sack a bunch of your own non-token creatures. You have control over it,
so it's a little different.
So it's a little bit better, but Gadrick sees no play.
Yeah.
Because it's only on your turn and the non-token clause. So it's tough to look at because it's not Revel in Riches. Revel in Riches makes like has the whole win the game thing.
Yeah,
should just be sharpied out on every Revel in Riches. Like this card sees less play because of the win condition on it.
Yeah.
But that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a treasure token with no limitation.
It does nothing though when it comes into play. Like at least Gadrick's a creature.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a creature that can't do much.
They can't block unless you have artifacts already. It's really tough to know what this card is going to look like in game. And I think it's going to be like pretty good, but not scary good, which might make it better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I compiled some stats because I was wondering some similar questions.
Yeah.
So I looked at the top 100 creatures on EDH Rec and wanted to know how many of them have 2 toughness, how many of them have 3 toughness. Because paying 6 for this feels like something you never want to do. Mm-hmm. So 2 toughness, there are 40 out of the top 100 creatures have 2 toughness. And I wanted to know, I did not count cards like E-Witness, Steve, Dockside, things that enter the battlefield and do something and you don't care about killing.
Right.
So 40 of the creatures in the top 100 are things like Mana Dorks or things that like you would be happy to kill. They didn't already do their thing. If you go 3 toughness, then that goes up to 53 of the creatures, of the top 100 creatures are cards that you would be happy to kill. Now, if you look at commanders, of the top 100 commanders, only 17 of them have 2 toughness, and it goes up to 37 if you go with 3 toughness. Again, all according to EDH Rec.
Out of the top 100.
I don't know what that tells us. It's a little maybe higher than I thought for the top 100 creatures.
I agree. 53 with 3 toughness or less is like, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but can you ever see your turn 5 being cast
a
this,
little board
make
wipe?
A treasure? So basically clean up everything, almost everything that's been played up till now, creature-wise, make a treasure, and now I have this sort of little advantage sitting there that's going to give me some treasure over the course of the game, but not a ton, probably. And, has a chance to miss things, right? They could have 4 toughness or more.
Right. It feels like the dream is you, like, cast your commander, which has 4 toughness, and then the turn after that, you wipe most of the board and clear up attacks for your commander that needs to attack or something like that.
Yeah, I sort of came down to like, I think a 3 toughness commander might be okay.
Yeah.
Where I'm just going to cast this for 2 most of the time. But if my commander is 2 toughness or less, I probably don't want this card. Unless it's a commander that for whatever reason, the sequencing usually determines I play it on turn 8, even though it has 2 toughness. Yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. I kind of like the card, but as I talk through it, I don't have a lot of reasons for why I like it.
Yeah, it says treasure on it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That usually means it's good.
And a board wipe plus seems good. I'm hesitant to play board wipes these days because it feels like the format has gotten to the speed where it's either too late by the time I can cast it, or I cast, but they repopulate so fast that I didn't do enough, so that it's like I have to race in the other direction. I have to be the one that's
ahead.
That needs to be board wiped, not the one doing the board wiping. Does this kind of cross the line? I'm really not sure. I'll be interested to hear people's experiences with it. I think that's going to be more indicative than any evaluation we can kind of predict right now.
For sure. There's also value to it just being a permanent. It's good. It's better in green decks. It's better like in red devotion decks. It's better in enchantment decks. You could trigger enchantresses, although you'd kill a lot of your enchantresses. Although you could just cast this for red 0 and just have it in play.
Interesting.
And see if you make some treasures.
Might be yeah, and I think
then it kind of looks more like
if you have a lot
text
of
to me.
edict effects, maybe you more likely to play it. You playing, if you're playing Merciless Executioner, Fleshbag Marauder, a bunch of things like that, that becomes a little bit more. You have more chances to force them to trigger it. Then it becomes a little bit better.
Yeah.
I've played against decks that just loop Fleshbag, and you're just
a
like,
nightmare.
I can never hold anything on the board. And now they're making treasure every time they do it. Like that feels like those type of decks would want it. So yeah, this is the one above all else that I'd be interested to hear from everybody out there in the comments on Twitter or whatever. Let us know if you're playing with it or against it, how it's been.
Yeah.
Because it could easily be a monologue text situation where I'm I kind of like it. And then a year down the road, I'm like, I don't like it.
I will say it smells like a monologue text.
There's a really good chance that a year from now, I've never played it in a deck, or I played it in a deck and took it out.
Yeah. Where you're like, ugh, that just didn't do what I needed it to do.
Yeah. Every time I have it, I just don't find a spot to cast it.
Yep. This next one I like. It's Sting the Glinting Dagger. It's a 2-mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. Love that. At the beginning of each combat, untap equipped creature. Equipped creature has first strike as long as it's blocking or blocked by a goblin. Who cares? Equip 2.
It's all about the untap, right?
It is all about the untap and haste.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about the haste.
Yeah. So I think
because things that want to be untapped usually want haste.
Yeah. And like Equip 2 is not nothing, but it's pretty good. Like two we deal with, especially for an effect that's this powerful. And what I like about it is it's colorless.
Yeah, that is the big thing, because up till now, green and blue and Drum Bellower, I guess, recently existed, but Yeah, white's got a couple of ways to do it. White Plume Adventurer will untap one thing every upkeep. Drum Bellower will untap your creatures every turn. Seedborn Muse will run in this kind of deck. But when it comes to blue and black, it's way harder to untap something every turn unless you're doing like Thornbite Staff things. Yeah, Freed from the Real, Penman's Aura.
Right.
Those are just combo-y things.
But you have to, usually they're combo-y things. You're not paying a blue every turn to untap like a pinger or something that sounds mana intensive. So having this sort of free untap all the time that isn't necessarily a scary combo piece and is just free every turn, plus the haste, a lot of decks are excited about this.
Yeah. I forgot about the haste, but basically any commander that taps to do something is going to want this card, right?
Yeah. I was looking at specifically blue and black stuff, but also red stuff that would be excited about this. I mean, Heartless Iditsuga with this thing is terrifying.
It'll just kill the whole table in like one rotation.
Yeah, like Arcanus the Omnipotent is an oldie, but like if you can untap Arcanus every turn and give him haste, that's great. I really like Feign the Broker, which is like tap and sacrifice something to get some value out of it. It has an untap clause on it, but it's 4 mana to do. So, like, I would have slammed this card into my Atla Palani deck.
Yeah, it's sweet in Atla.
Yeah, because Atla
is really slowed down by once per turn thing.
Really, yeah.
And the no haste.
And the no haste. So I ran Thornbite Staff in Atla, and there were combos with that, which was fine. But I found that Thornbite Staff was like set off red alarms on everybody, so you just lose your Thornbite Staff.
She's going to kill us.
And you're like, I just want to untap it once per turn. It's really scary with something like Captain Sisse. Any commander that has a tap ability on it is going to be excited about Sting.
I mean, I love tap abilities. It's my favorite thing. I often build around tap abilities, so this is just another piece to go in the, Seedborn Muse, Drum Bellower toolkit. But I do like that it's not combo-y, because I often don't run Freed from the Real and Penman's Aura for that reason, even though they're really, really good. But you just accidentally are like, oh crap, I'm infinite here. Yeah. So it's nice when you don't have to push into that layer of combo that I don't personally tend to play.
And it won't set off the same like threat flags as that or Thornbite Staff or any of the even Seedborn Muse.
Yeah, because it has a rev limiter on it, right? Like it can only go, so it can only do that once per turn. So
the amount of people that run Seedborn Muse and Atla Palani decks, and it's just to untap Atla, is like, it's cool that Sting exists.
All right, the next one is Subjugate the Hobbits. 5 blue, so 7 mana for a sorcery. Gain control of each non-commander creature with mana value 3 or less.
This one's wild. Is it good?
I don't think so.
I don't think it's super good.
No, I don't.
It's 7 mana to get the little stuff? To get all this stuff that we're like killing with Spiteful Banditry?
Yeah, I mean, I did just go on a whole rant about how like people
There's
are
a lot
playing
more
more
little
small
stuff.
things and whatever, but like the 7 mana cost of it, and it doesn't get commanders.
Yeah.
Is just like...
It does not feel like it's going to win the game. If I'm casting a 7 mana sorcery, I really needed to win the game.
It might even not be that impactful.
It steals all the Scoot Swarms.
That's true, actually. Maybe I just changed my mind about it.
Is it good?
It does beat Scoot Storm.
It reminds me a little bit of like Clone Legion, which is 7 blue. It says for each creature target player controls, create a token that's a copy of that creature.
Yep.
And it's 2 more mana, but you get all the stuff, and you're like, I hope I untap.
Yeah, Clone Legion's not even good.
I don't think it's
first of all, your
super
opponent
good.
has to have a really good board.
That's true.
Or you do. And if
Yeah.
you've got a good board, you're already winning. You don't need
just go
discard.
get 'em.
And if they've got a good board, then you copied it, and they get to go now, and make their board better than yours.
Also, their board is designed to work with their board.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Their stuff is like, I don't need any of this stuff.
Yeah, you have mass manipulation on here, which is a little bit closer, but if you spend the same amount of mana, how many creatures do you get to steal? I think it's just 1.
Yeah, 6 mana will get you 1 thing,
And
8 mana will get you 2.
So,
but you probably want to steal the stuff that's higher than 3 CMC.
6 mana for get their 12 CMC thing sounds better maybe than get all the 3 CMC non-commander things. If it stole commanders, I understand why they didn't do it because it's a feel bad.
Yeah.
But then I think it starts to push towards at least playable. But at non-commander, it doesn't feel playable. You're likely to just leave them with this is going to mildly inconvenience them.
Right. You're like,
They're going to be like, dang.
It's funny.
I really wish I could keep those 3 tokens in that, that 1 utility creature.
It is really funny that it is super flavorful because it's called Subjugate the Hobbits.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are the Hobbits going to do? Yeah. Why did you go after the Hobbits?
Why? Why are you
They're
scared
like
of them?
really good at farming. Like, I don't think you need them.
I don't think you need to subjugate them.
Like, go get more orcs.
Yeah. True.
There are some scary things, of course, that you can steal, but likely the things that you're stealing are like they're scary value pieces, like Academy Manufacturers, which you may not necessarily be set up to take advantage of.
Yeah.
So it's neat, but I agree that it's not going to see much play.
All right, we just got a few left here.
Yeah, 2 more.
Okay.
I love this next one. It's Taunt from the Rampart. 3 red, white for a sorcery. Goad all creatures your opponents control until your next turn. Those creatures can't block. So this looks like a Disrupt Decorum.
Yeah, that's the very clear comparison is Disrupt Decorum.
Which is goad all creatures you don't control for 4 mana. So you add 1 white and it adds this clause until your next turn. Those creatures can't block.
I do like that extra clause, though, and it matters a decent amount because I've been in situations where I'm down to 1v1 and I have a Disrupt Decorum in my hand and it's literally a dead card. It will do nothing in the game. Mm-hmm. And at least when you get to that point, you can falter effects, make their whole board unblockable. It's something. Yeah. And definitely we've all been in games where like if I could just get through, I would win it. So that extra bit it does matter. Yeah, I was looking at closest comps, and I think this is interesting because obviously you look at Disrupt Decorum and something like a Bothersome Quasit that makes it so goaded creatures can't block. Yep. Like those things that you think of first, but it reminds me kind of like an Akroma's Will because it gives you that unblockable thing. Like you can still cast it in a moment where Akroma's Will could be good. Yeah. And it's not that it does what Akroma's Will necessarily does, but it lives in that same moment where you're like, okay, all I need to be able to do is like punch through and get a little bit more damage done. And that goading is going to help you with the damage, and the unblockable gives you a great clean attack. So I think it lives in those decks where you're like, I'm going to build up some damage. I'm hopefully going to take a couple of extra combats. And this is the kind of card that punches through. Well, I do think also, we're not talking about it yet, but the fact that it makes all the creatures unblockable does matter a lot for when your opponents are goaded when you're playing in a non-1v1 situation too. Right. So it's very possible that they're going to be forced to kill each other where they would have, with Disrupt Decorum, been able to survive. Yeah, some creatures would die, but they could strategically attack the right... And you see this. When you cast Disrupt Decorum, they start to collude, And they're like, okay, if you attack me with this and you split it up here, you'll take 4, you'll take 8, I'll block this way, this will die, but that'll live. And they do this rigmarole, and listen, it hurts them, but not as much as it could. This one's a lot harder, because you're like, I have to swing everything, and none of it can be blocked.
None of it can
and
block.
then you got to swing everything, and none of it can be blocked. And I think this will lead to more moments where somebody's going to die. Maybe 2
like
players are going to die.
It also totally changes the turn order thing. Like when you cast Disrupt Decorum,
Oh, this is interesting, yeah.
going first is like, I crash all my stuff
And then I have no
everybody's
blockers.
untapped blockers, and I have no blockers, so I'm the clean attack for the other 2 people.
Yep.
So you get slammed if you're the first person to be goated. But Taunt the Rampart, if you're first, you're like, okay, I can attack, and it's a clean attack at the very least. And it doesn't change my position because I wasn't going to be able to block before. I'm actually the only person that can kind of get blockers down.
Because I can cast blockers
that can block this
that
turn.
can block this turn, yeah.
So it totally shifts the dynamic of like...
You'd rather be, if they cast this, you'd rather be the player to their left, and if you cast Disrupt to Scorn, you'd rather be the player to their right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it looks so similar, but the blocking changes everything.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that till you put that down. I was like, oh, that is super interesting. I don't know if that changes
How you
which
evaluate
decks you play it in, but it
Yeah.
might. And I've often thought that the most unexplored area of like commander strategy is talking about seeding and how that should affect your decision making. I don't read a lot of articles or hear a lot of people talk about it, and I know why, because it's difficult to, because we've tried. But I think that is a thing that we don't consider enough about cards, about like seating at the table, the geography of where people are seated and how that changes your decision making. Because it should. I should probably play a little differently depending on what I'm worried about, not just what it is but where it is. Yeah.
I think it does change what decks it's good in, because I like Taunt the Rampart for aggro decks specifically.
Because of the falter. Yeah.
And so you just get that clean attack and you can send everything. You don't have to worry about the crackback because you've got some time, unless there's some haste things that happen, but it buys you a full turn where you're like, I can send all of my stuff. Or like if I have 2 combats, great. They're both unblockable. That's a huge moment where it feels like a Chrome as well, where like you can cast a Chrome as well, and you can attack with all your stuff, and you're safe to attack with all your stuff and not worry about that crackback because of the life gain, but also because I think they have Vigilance. I assume Vigilance is in here somewhere.
Chrome as well has got a lot
It is, yeah. Vigilance is in here somewhere, yeah. So I like Taunt from the Rampart a lot. I think we're going to see it. We're like, Disrupt Decorum, I'll cast to be just like, keep them busy.
Yeah.
While I do my thing.
Yeah, that's
And,
exactly what it is.
It's just, you guys figure this out, and I'll focus. Taunt from the Rampart's a win con.
Okay, let's talk about the very last card left to discuss. And of course, it is...
Appropriately, but also alphabetically.
The One Ring, because of that the... It is 4 mana for a legendary artifact. It has Indestructible. It says, when the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring, and you can tap it to put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. So this comes in, protects you for a turn. The first time you tap it, you'll put a burden counter on it and draw 1 and lose 1. Sorry, you won't draw 1 and lose 1 at that time. You'll draw 1 and lose 1 on your upkeep.
Yeah, you'll draw 1 now, lose 1 next.
Yeah, on your upkeep. If it were to go away by that time. But then the second time you tap it, you put a second burden counter on it and draw 2. Third time, tap it and draw 3. Okay. It's the most powerful object in the known universe, or at least in Middle-earth.
It had to be good.
And I think it is one of the top 3 cards, obviously after Orcish Bowmasters, and then for me it's between this and the Mirkwood Bats as to the second most powerful card in the set. It is colorless, it is card draw, it's 4 mana, so it's a crowded slot. I mean, let's talk about it.
Yeah, this card's really interesting. I want to do a quick reminder. Protection it says protection from everything. It's not everything. It's damage, it's targeting, it's cursing. So you cannot be damaged, you cannot be targeted, you cannot be cursed. Your life total can still change. You can have your stuff drained. Protection from everything's a lot.
Yeah.
Not everything.
Yeah, the targeting is the one that's kind of the most broad.
Yeah.
But if it says every player does a thing, you'll still do the thing.
Right.
But if every player takes damage, you won't take the damage.
You won't take damage.
Because, yeah.
You could still lose life. It's what people think that's attached to protection is not. That's attached to Teferi's protection.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of ways to take advantage of the protection thing. I feel like it's just like there are decks that want to take advantage of the first part where they're like, I'm going to bounce it and recast it, and it's going to draw cards. And
that could be a thing, right? Like I replay the One Ring somehow every turn or whatever, and just I have protection from everything until you can figure out a way to get rid of this indestructible artifact.
Yeah, I can't be damaged. I can't be cursed. Like, you got to figure out something else.
It will be very hard to kill me. Yeah.
And you can do that with, like, the Drofna is the new one. She's got an activated ability that just says return target artifact you control to its owner's hand.
I love this card, by the way.
It's great.
I played in a lot of decks.
It's really good.
Yeah, so all you do is cast this, bounce it to your hand, cast it, bounce it to your hand. You don't care about the draw. You'll take the draw. You'll do.
Meanwhile, you're just drawing.
You still draw one.
Yeah.
But you're mostly just like, what are you going to do? You can't affect me, really.
Yeah. And if they go to remove it or like exile an artifact, boink, gone.
Yeah. You got to kill Drafna first.
Yep. So there's definitely a way to abuse that. But I think the star here is going to be this drawing thing, because that's going to be what most decks do, is use it for the draw.
Yeah. You're right. Because if you're just a white deck or a red deck, red for sure, right? You just play this card. I think white's still in the position we play it. Black probably still plays it. Shoot. Because if you think about the efficiency of it, 4 mana, draw 1 now, but then on your next untap, you tap it again and you've drawn now 3 cards for your 4 mana. That is a rate we are willing to pay. It's not the best rate, but then that's Harmonize, right? Which doesn't see a lot of play these days, but if Harmonize had the upside of, if you have it one more turn, you draw 3 more cards, and that's insane now. I paid 4 mana for 6 cards.
Yeah.
And from there, it's ridiculous, because now you're going to be in the, I paid 4 mana for 10 cards. I paid 4 mana for 15 cards. I paid 4 mana for 21 cards. The game has to go on quite a while for that to happen, but I like that you get to, I'm okay with it on 1 rotation. 3 cards, you're okay with it.
Yeah.
And it's just, from there, it goes from good to great pretty fast.
And there's like, we're not talking about the life loss because it just kind of isn't a factor. The game's not going to go long enough for this to really kill you. It's honestly less damage than like a Sylvan Library.
A lot less. Yeah.
Yeah, which
you would play if you had them, right?
Yeah,
you just play as many as you got. Yeah.
So, but it is slow. You need, like, if you draw this late and you play it, it cantrips.
It's still better than Phyrexian Arena if you draw it late.
Yeah, because it does scale. Eventually.
Well, you get 1 now.
You get 1 now.
Phyrexian Arena is upkeep, and then you get 2 on your. So you've still got more cards overall.
3
quicker.
cards, 4 mana over the course of 2 turns.
Yeah,
and you've lost 2 life.
I like how Phyrexian Arena, and I think it is the perfect bar because it is just on the edge of playable, right? Like, we've said many times that like I've started to prefer the Night's Whispers and stuff to Phyrexian Arena, but it is not. Like,
it's right there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not playable, and it's not the best version of this, but it is like, if you're above that, you're playable, and if you're below it, you're not. I think that's right where Phyrexian Arena is. Yeah,
it's a really great line, and this one's quite clearly above it, and it's quite clearly like, we have a clock, and it's that.
Because by the third time you do it, it's really bad. Yeah,
it's like, if it comes down, you're like, I gotta find removal right now. We gotta find it at some point. Or
I gotta steal it, or I gotta copy it. And it has to be
exiled. Like, there's a lot of you gotta steal it. The Isildur's Fateful Strike, or Isildur's Scroll of Isildur.
Right, Scroll of Isildur.
Yes, that's you can steal the ring, and it definitely comes down, and people go, oh no, which is great. Yeah. Like, that's what you want from this
the
kind
One Ring.
of effect.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's the One Ring. Everyone should want it or want to get rid of it. That's what it's supposed to do.
It's very fun, and it definitely scales with power. Like, the longer you have the ring, the more life you lose. The more power you have, the more everybody else needs to deal with it.
It feels that it sits at a good power level too, where it does not feel broken.
No.
But it doesn't feel like this is not good. Like, it's going to see a lot of play. I think it's going to be a good card, but it's also not a card that's like, what the heck were they thinking?
The decks that I would put it in over other card draw are the decks that I think can really take advantage of their protection clause. Yeah. Like, because there are really good spells that I would just run ahead of this, probably. And the thing that would get it over the line into the 99 is if I can cast it at flash speed. So if I like have the new Gandalf the White that lets you cast artifacts at flash speed,
so that you fog them,
protection in and it's a surprise. It's great. Like that, like we said in your new the Heliod deck that can reduce the casting cost of stuff based on cards that you draw, seems great. Drofna, that kind of thing. We've been playing with this idea of what you can do by skipping your turn, because there's a lot of effects in Magic that last until your next turn.
But if you skip your turn...
But if you skip your turn, they never end. And Goad's on the list, and this protection spells like this are on the list. And you can, like, there are cards like Chronotog or Chronotog's Totem.
Chronotog's hilarious.
That you can pay 0, and the Chronotog is +3/+3, but it says you skip your next turn. Play this ability only once each turn, and only if Chronotog Totem is a creature, which costs 2 mana to make him a creature. But Chronotog, yeah, it's a free effect that allows you to skip your turn over and over again. And you're like, I have protection from everything until you can solve Chronotog.
Yeah, you need a way to make Chronotog a creature all the time. Otherwise, you'd have to keep turning it into a creature.
Yeah, you could use Chronotog or the Totem.
Anything that turns like your artifacts into like creatures with power and toughness equal or CMC or something would do it.
Magosi the Waterbell is a good version of this. It's pay a blue and tap it and skip your next turn, and you can just sort of extend these protection effects. Yeah. But you can also tap it to remove an Eon counter and take an extra turn. So you're not just skipping your turn forever.
You're like, I'm going to do this, but I'm also protected, so nothing can happen to me. And now I'm going to take 2 turns and maybe win. Yeah.
If you're playing with that kind of stuff and you're trying to do blue, like sort of weird goading stuff, I can see where this definitely crosses the line into like this card is one of the best cards in the deck, and I'm tutoring for it every time.
Yeah, and then you're playing it for the protection part, and the card draw is just gravy.
It's just gravy.
Man, that'd be great if the card draw is just gravy.
Yeah, you don't want to skip your turn all the time, I guess, if you're trying to draw more counters. But anyway, if you're a nutcase, you can skip your turn and gain
before we go, we do have proliferate written down as well as another way to add burden counters and then just get it up to 5-6 counters a lot quicker. Mm-hmm. So Yawgmoth, Flux Channeler, Evolution Sage, Norn's Choir Master. There's a ton. Yeah. Because now there's proliferate in every color. So yeah, if you have a little bit of proliferate, this gets even better. So.
Yeah, I think this is a great draw spell and a really sweet artifact, and you want to be able to take advantage of a specific part of it in order for it to get into the deck.
That protection from everything does, in a lot of ways, also help solve the problem of these being bad when you draw them late, like Dawn of a New Age, Phyrexian Arena, which we've been using as our bar. Those are pretty bad, turn 7-8, right? Like, they just don't do a lot. This protection does matter. It's often... how many games where like I just needed one more turn, I was 1 mana short. These are phrases we hear a lot, and we hear them a lot because they're true, right? Like you just needed a little extra time than your opponent. Well, this could buy you that time.
It's not exactly an extra turn, but it's kind of an extra turn.
Yeah, it's in that family. It's not exactly Teferi's protection, but it can do some similar things in certain situations. That protection from everything does really, depending on the deck, mean that I get another shot here. Or I can guarantee myself a shot here. So yeah, I like that. And I think we're going to see the One Ring quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That is going to do it for our In the 99. Quite a marathon.
Yeah. Whoosh. 20 cards. A lot of them super cool. A lot of them tough to figure out how exactly they're going to show up in the format. Josh, do you have a favorite of any of the cards we talked about today?
I think it's Reprieve. Yeah. Yeah. When I looked at the list and I was like, realistically, the card I'm probably going to play the most out of this is that. Because I did plan to replace or add an addition to Lapse of Certainty. What about you?
I mean, there's a lot of cards I'm excited to see. I think the one that fits me the most is Taunt from the Rampart. Taunt. Yeah, that's
definitely a very unique card.
Yeah, it feels like a card that I have spots for exactly, and am excited to play.
I'm definitely gonna die to it a lot.
It creates this moment that I really like in games where everybody goes, "Oh no!"
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
Yeah, I have 100 Scoot Swarms.
I thought it was totally fine. I thought I was gonna win this game. All right, to the listeners, what is your favorite card from this set? What are you looking forward to playing the most? What are you most excited about? What new cards slot perfectly into your already existing Commander decks? We'd love to hear from you in the comments, Twitter, email if you want to do it that way. Let us know. And what was the name of the red card?
Spiteful Banditry.
Yes, I really would like to hear your experiences with Spiteful Banditry because, man, that one's got me perplexed a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Before we go, let's talk about our sponsors, cardkingdom.com/command. If you want to pick up any of these Lord of the Rings cards, or if you want to chase after the one ring in collector booster packs, then cardkingdom.com/command is the place to go to buy all your Magic products, singles, anything at all. You can order all the cards you need if you're building a new Aragorn deck or a Sauron deck, or if you want Aragorn or Sauron, Card Kingdom's got the inventory, and they will send all that stuff to you in one convenient package, so you get it all at once. Again, cardkingdom.com/command.
And once those cards are in your hand, you're going to need to protect them. Go straight to ultrapro.com/command to get all of your Lord of the Rings swag, but also just great products that keep all of your cards and all of your decks safe organized and looking good.
Yeah,
you know?
that's right.
I haven't gone to Ultra Pro yet to get a bunch of the Lord of the Rings mats yet, but that is what I'm most excited about, and I'm most excited about because Ultra Pro has exactly the art that I'm excited about. There's so many cards in this set that are stunning, and I just want to see it bigger and more on the battlefield. It's a very immersive set, so having the playmat to match makes it feel even more Lord of the Rings-y, and you can get that only at ultrapro.com/command.
All right, everybody, before we go, big thanks to our amazing team here at the Command Zone: Eric Lem, Megan Yip, Demon Lenz, Arthur Meadowcroft, Lady Danger, Manson Lung, Josh Murphy, Jake Boss, Jordan Pridgen, Sam Waldo, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Block, Mitch Trafford, Evan Limburger, Gabriel Pozos, Craig Blanchett, and, of course, the ineffable Jimmy Wong.
Yeah.
I don't even know what ineffable means, but it felt right to say it.
Honorable.
All right, thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.